right. I am now joined by Damon College philosophy professor Mark Warren, who is actually a meta-ethicist, so very relevant, and Georgia State University Perimeter College professor Ryan Lake, who I'm pleased to see is finally decided to start, fitting in with the GTA aesthetic by growing a beard. So
I'm doing my best. I don't know how this is actually going to work out, but I'm giving it a shot.
all right. Well, good hustle at any rate.
Yeah.
So we are going to be watching William Lane Craig versus Shelly Kagan, which we thought would be good for a couple reasons. So we were off last time, moves so strangely now. Yeah, last Sunday we were off for Valentine's Day, but now that we are back on, we want to do this because a couple weeks ago, something like that, we watched William Lane Craig versus Christopher Hitchens in a debate that was, mostly about other things, although certainly closely related, but partially about this. This is God necessary for morality topic. It was, probably, actually, I know probably about it. I mean, it was definitely the worst I'd seen Hitchens do in a debate. And so, given my particular biases, is kind of dispiriting to watch. And this is obviously one where Craig is engaging with somebody who is who's very good on the kinds of things they're talking about. So, Hitchens is very good when he's talking about, when he's making historical and political and sort of directly moral arguments. But he's a little lost, when things start to get more abstract and philosophical. And obviously, that's where Kagan is the best. And then also thought that it would be useful debate prep that I should see this, because tomorrow at 5 Eastern on the Modern Day Debate channel, I am going to be arguing with megachurch pastor and author Douglas Wilson about basically the same topic, and so this seems like it would be a good thing to do in the run up for that. So I guess want to set this up a little bit. I guess
a question, Ben. How do you feel about platforming Doug Wilson?
Yeah. Why are you platforming that guy?
Yeah.
What's up?
No, that's definitely right. So he is. So I think he's published dozens, certainly, of books. It included that one of essays back and forth between him and Christopher Hitchens. Debated Hitchens a bunch of times. I believe the megachurch where he's a pastor has its own theological seminary, its own publishing arm, its own magazine. So my point here is that for sure, arguing with me on YouTube is going to be his big break.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, has he ever been on Give Them an Argument? No.
Yeah. How do you feel about platforming Ryan?
Yeah.
A little guilty, but I mean, I just do what I have to do for the clicks.
I am a household name now, and you're to blame. So,
the last time I was here, I made a joke about how people should go check out my paper on how moral inferentialism, the analytical view, solved the Frege-Geach problem. Mm-hmm. And since then, I've gotten a lot of downloads. So
those were all me. Sorry.
Right. Country, download it from various places, so you'd feel better.
Mm-hmm. Well, you platformed me to Ryan.
Yeah. I'd never heard about it before. You've never mentioned this.
I never mentioned it. Yeah.
So, thanks, man.
Yeah, anytime. Is it a good paper?
No. I mean, I didn't actually read it. Okay, I just downloaded it a lot.
Nobody has.
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah. All right. So want to set up our introduce our fighters here. Guess not.
Yeah.
Oh, are you asking us to?
Yeah.
No.
There's nobody else here, Mark.
I don't know. Andrew is in the chat. He might want to do it.
So William Lane Craig, we're familiar with already. He's a philosopher and apologist at where is he? Where's William Lane Craig?
Is he a professor? I don't know where he's at. We're obviously very ready for this. I can do Shelly Kagan.
Visiting professor of philosophy at Talbot School of Theology.
Oh,
and professor of philosophy at Houston Baptist University. I just remembered.
Okay.
Yeah. Shelly Kagan is Clark Professor of Philosophy at Yale University, where he has taught since 1995. He is best known for his writings about moral philosophy and normative ethics.
But Shelly Kagan's like the real deal. Like,
William
Lane Craig, I've only been exposed to him on YouTube, basically. But Shelly Kagan, like, I read him in grad school. I read him in Michael Sloat's ethics course.
Yeah. I mean, he's very much a reader. I mean, I guess you might read Craig if you're doing philosophy, religion stuff. But so I think he's real deal in that area.
I actually did read Craig in grad school, so I took, since he wrote that collection of essays back and forth with Quentin Smith about the cosmological arguments. I actually did an independent study with Quentin on that book, and the paper that I wrote for that was my writing sample when I applied to PhD programs. I was, took that class while I was in my master's program. So it's actually thanks to Dr. Craig that I know the two of you.
Thanks, Dr. Craig.
Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think he is like a real. I don't know. I think Craig's an interesting combination because he's. Like, he is fairly real deal in terms of, like, I think if you do philosophy of religion, you probably have run into his stuff and, probably engaged with that. And even some other, metaphysics-y areas, he writes about, people might be, familiar with him there, but he's also very clearly an apologist first and foremost.
Yeah. Is that true? Do people read Craig who aren't doing phil religion?
I mean, I guess I'm not 100% sure about that. My only, I mean, he wrote a couple of books about metaphysics of time stuff. I don't know how widely read they are. He actually has this view that it's like, if you're, he actually has a view linking that up to his religious views that, like, it's that for reasons I don't entirely understand, he thinks that it's important that Christians be presentists, that they not believe that past events still exist and future events already exist, which I
is free will stuff. He's like a libertarian about free will.
Yeah, for sure he's a libertarian about free will. I don't know how much he sees those two topics as being related, or how much, to what extent it's just that he has this like this view that it's like bad to think that Christ is still on the cross, in a different region of space time, or something like that.
So, that would be weird. I'm trying to figure out what could be the possible connection between that kind of Christian view and thinking presentism is really important.
Yeah.
I mean, I can see how you might not want to be a B theorist about time because maybe your Christian theology requires a libertarian conception of free will. And
yeah, I think that's I won't dive into this, but I think libertarianism is perfectly compatible with the B theory of time. But So just for viewers who aren't familiar with this debate, the A theory or tense theory of time says that grammatical tense latches on to this objective feature of reality, that there really are
like properties like pastness and presentness, and the extreme form of the A theory is presentism, which says only the present moment exists. The past doesn't exist anymore. The future doesn't exist yet. And the B theory, or tenseless theory of time, says no, these words like now or present, past, future are just indexicals, which means like an example of an indexical is here. When I say East Lansing is here and Mark and Ryan aren't here, and if Ryan says Muskegon is here, Ben isn't here, we're not actually having a disagreement. We agree on the facts. I'm using here to mean, where the speaker of this sentence is, and Ryan's using here in the same way. And so according to B theorists, terms like now or past or future are the same way. They just identify where the speaker is in time. And
it gives the metaphysical.
I don't know why I made this gesture to illustrate that, that was almost like a jerk off gesture. I don't know what that had to do with the B theory of time, but anyway, that's.
I wonder if maybe he wants to be an atheist because he wants to rule out time travel, so people don't go back and mess with Jesus.
There's a paper.
I'll write that there. You're a Christian, you have to be a B theorist or an A theorist, because if you're a B theorist, people might go back in time and mess with Jesus.
Yeah, that makes sense. As much sense as anything else. So I do have a long-standing, idea for a Scooby-Doo spin-off show, which would be exactly the same as Scooby-Doo, except for that the van has a flux capacitor, could travel around time, but it's still completely naturalistic. So when like the scene that I've always imagined is one
they pull off Jesus in his mask.
yeah.
Is it the old guy who runs the carnival?
Would have gotten away with it too. And of course, there'll be like 2 Roman centurions dragging him away.
I'd watch the hell out of that.
The libertarianism compatibilism thing, which actually I believe comes up at least in passing here, but is roughly about. So people watched the stream that Ryan and I did about the one with all the IDW idiots. It was Sam Harris and a couple of those other guys about free will. We did a deep dive into that there, but roughly the issue is, if we live in a world where every physical event, including the ones in your brain, are determined by prior physical events, given the cause happens, the effect has to happen, can we still have whatever kind of freedom we need to be responsible for our actions, for us to be at fault when we do bad things, for example? And compatibilist says yes, and an incompatibilist says no, and the kind of incompatibilist that says, rather than saying, therefore we don't have free will, says, but don't worry about it because not everything is determined, is a libertarian. And that sounds like something that would be hooked up to this debate about the A theory, the B theory of time, until you start thinking about it a little bit more. The connection gets a lot less obvious.
Can we do that? I know that that's not the topic at hand, but this is what the people are here for, right?
They are clamoring for a deep dive into whether the A and B theory of time say anything about that.
How do you combine libertarianism with B theory of time, Dr. Lake?
Well, I mean, as I understand it, I mean, this isn't the physics isn't my area, but as I understand it, a B theory of time doesn't say anything in particular about the causal connections that exist between different points in time. So whatever causal model you want, like, a person could be if you want to be the radical, like Chisholm, like uncaused, self-caused, like, I bring my actions and my character and everything into being at this given moment, and it's undetermined completely by anything that came before, by my genes, by my upbringing, anything else. All of that could still be true, and it could also, that moment at which I do that could exist in a tenseless state.
Yeah. So I think one way to make Ryan's point, like, kind of circle and underline it, is that you can imagine that if determinism is false, you can have two possible worlds that have exactly the same past and different futures.
Mm-hmm.
In both of those worlds, it will be and all the same laws of physics and all that.
Mm-hmm.
In both of those worlds, whatever, like, say, libertarian free choice you make, there will already be a fact about which one you made, but that
mm-hmm.
fact won't be entailed by any of the facts about the past.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, so all the kinds of thought experiments, the manipulator thought experiments, or like, what if you had the same genes as Hitler or whatever, all of those don't get going. You can still avoid all those things that trouble libertarians.
This is a Ryan Lake level bad joke, but I really want to do something about
Hitler genes.
Genes?
That might be my next comic.
Okay.
Yeah. There's something there. Yeah, I'll work on that.
Fair enough. Well, now that we've satisfied the clamoring of the audience to do that, to sort out the relationship with the philosophy of time debate and the free will debate, you want to start out the Kagan versus Craig?
Sure.
That's what we're here for.
Yeah. Well, I thought we were here for the other thing that we just did.
Yeah, but we're already done. So
Okay.
Dessert.
So can I leave? Are we done?
Yeah. Good mark, dude.
All right.
Welcome to the Veritas Forum, engaging university students and faculty in discussions about life's hardest questions and the relevance of Jesus Christ to all of life.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I want to thank the Veritas Forum for inviting me, and I want to thank Bill Craig for agreeing to this discussion, this debate. The topic for tonight's debate is whether God is necessary for morality. Is God necessary for morality? I'm going to be arguing that a belief in God or the existence of God is not necessary for morality. I'm at a bit of a handicap in doing this. I spoke to one of my colleagues, another moral philosopher, gave him the topic, is God necessary for morality? And his answer was, well, of course not. Now, I don't think the issue is quite as open and shut and black and white as that, but it does reveal, I suppose, a common outlook among moral philosophers that I share, that people have been doing moral philosophy without appeal to God for thousands of years, at the same time that they've also been doing moral philosophy that does appeal to God. It's not at all obvious to those of us who take a secular approach to doing moral philosophy what the problem is supposed to be. So I'm going to try to anticipate what some of the difficulties that Bill Craig will be raising, and maybe that's unfair. I don't mean to be saddling him with objections that he doesn't raise, or of course maybe I will be raising objections that he will go on to raise and he'll do a better job of it. So I may not get it quite right, but what I'll try to do is sketch a little bit about where I think a plausible account of morality might be that doesn't make use of the appeal to God, and try to answer some objections that one might raise against it. Second preliminary remark is I'll no doubt typically slip into talking about what the atheist might say or the atheist might believe, or an atheist approach to moral philosophy. And that's a bit of a misnomer, because I'm describing a view that's completely available to theists as well. And calling it an atheist view, I simply mean it's a view that does not make use of the appeal to God. It's not theistic, it is atheistic in that sense. And it's not necessarily limited to those who deny the existence of God. Let me start by putting aside a question that may be of interest to some of you, and if it does come up in the question period, I'm happy to address it at greater length. But one thing one might worry about in asking whether or not morality requires existence of God is whether people could act morally if there is no God, or if they didn't believe in God, whether moral motivation or moral behavior presupposes in some way belief in a deity. I certainly hope that it's apparent to every person in this audience that the answer to that question is certainly not. That is to say, atheists, and here I do mean atheists in the more narrow sense, people who deny the existence of God, are just as capable of acting morally as anybody else. They're just as capable of acting immorally as anybody else. Theists, at any rate, don't have any any kind of monopoly on moral behavior. And I'm completely confident that Bill will agree about that. It's, I think, such a non-issue that I have, as I say, I'm going to say nothing more about it. The more interesting question, there are several questions one might pursue, but the one I'll be focusing on, what I take to be perhaps the most interesting question, is whether or not we need God for there to be morality, for there to be a genuine difference between right and wrong. Here we think of God not as the motivator for moral behavior, but rather God as the source or the author or the ground of morality, its basis. And so the question I'll be focusing on is whether or not there can be a secular, non-theistic basis for morality, and I believe the answer to that is yes. Now, I could get off at this point, except, of course, again, I don't think there's going to be any difference of opinion between Bill and me on the question, do non-theists believe in morality? Of course we all believe in morality. It's whether or not there could really be something. Am I, as an atheist, entitled to talk about right and wrong as something that genuinely exists without having God? So that's the question I'm going to focus on, not whether, people talk this way, whether the atheists talk this way, but whether there's some logical difficulty about their talking that way. So what I'm going to do is very quickly sketch an outline of a view about ethics that I find congenial. It's not at all original to me. I don't in any way mean to suggest it's the only kind of outline one could accept as an atheist trying to explain what morality is all about, but it'll give you an illustration of, I think, a fairly plausible approach, or so it seems to me. And then I'll raise some deeper questions about it. So here's the basic idea. Right and wrong is a matter of whether or not your behavior hurts people or fails to help them. So, which is, wrong action is action that hurts somebody or fails to help them in the relevant circumstances. And right action is basically a matter of those behaviors that refrain from hurting people and do provide help. So once we've got this basic idea in place, it's pretty natural to see how the more familiar rules of ordinary common sense morality fall out from that. We have an explanation as to why it is that you shouldn't lie, because lying hurts people, why you shouldn't commit murder, why you shouldn't rape, because rape hurts the victims of rape, why you have to aid the needy, why slavery is wrong, why you need to clothe the naked and feed the hungry. In all these ways, these behaviors are morally wrong or right because of their connection with harm and failure to help. Now, there's a lot of details that would need to get worked out. I think for tonight's purposes, they're not likely to be all that important. Let me just mention that, of course, it's important to get clear that there's a variety of ways that people can be hurt. There's not just physical harm, but there's emotional harm, and there's assaults on somebody's autonomy, and you can fail to respect them in a variety of ways. I don't think I need to pursue that, so unless it comes up, I won't say more about that. And the second point is that, of course, to say that you can't ever harm is a bit of a simplification. There are going to be cases in which one would have an adequate justification for harming somebody else. For example, in cases of self-defense against a deliberate aggressor. There's a great deal of work in contemporary moral philosophy about what these exception cases are, what are the adequate justifications for harming or failing to help. And again, although I'm happy to go there, I don't think we need to, so I won't say more about it unless it comes up. Now, that's the nutshell of the moral theory that I believe in, and clearly I didn't say anything about God, and so it seems to me I'm entitled to say that I believe in morality, and I'm entitled to believe in morality, and the question I only want to ask at this point is, why would anybody think otherwise? Well, so here's a worry that one might have. We might ask, not do I believe in this sort of thing, but are these things really wrong on the atheist view that I've just sketched? Or is it just a matter of opinion? Now, that's tricky. Of course, we're going to be arguing about whether or not God's necessary for morality, what shape morality has, and so forth and so on. And all of that, in some sense, is just a matter of opinion. But I take it the deeper question is there a fact of the matter as to who's right? Now, just as there's a fact of the matter as to whether or not there is a God and what that God is like, I take it there's a fact of the matter with regard to whether or not it's wrong to harm people, whether it's wrong to rape, for example. I think it's wrong to rape. I take this to not just be a matter of opinion. It's not as though if I thought otherwise, rape would be okay, or if everybody thought otherwise, rape would be okay. Rape is wrong, full stop. So at least if you're worried about whether there could be genuine morality, where there are facts of the matter, then on an atheist account, I'm inclined to think, well, of course there can. We might wonder, what makes it wrong? And the answer is, well, it's wrong because, for example, rape is wrong because it harms the victim. Might ask instead, what do we mean in saying that it's wrong to rape? Now, this is a controversial matter, and not all moral philosophers agree about the ingredients that we need to build into the basic definition of right and wrong. But roughly, I take it that as at least a first pass, the thought is something like to believe in morality as a genuine, objective state of affairs is to believe that there are reasons to act morally, to help others and to avoid harming them, and that these reasons don't depend on the particular desires or goals you happen to have. It's not as though if you happen to care about truth, justice, and the American way, then you've got a reason to act morally. No, everybody has these reasons. These reasons are overriding, to use philosophers' jargon, they're categorical reasons. So when I say that it's an objective fact that rape is wrong, what I'm saying is there's this kind of overriding, strong, categorical reason not to harm people in this way. And that's not up to me to make it so, it's just so. Now, we might ask, is there a deeper account that can be offered about where these reasons come from, or what makes them so, or the basic rules of morality, what their ultimate foundation or basis is? And I want to say that secular atheist philosophers disagree about that point. Some are, as we might call them, non-foundationalists. They say, well, we can state the various moral rules, keep your promises, tell the truth, don't tell lies, don't hurt people, help the needy. And if we want, we can boil these rules down into a simpler set of rules. I've suggested don't harm, do help. But there may be nothing at all deeper to be said about what makes those rules what makes those rules the valid rules. It's just an objective fact about reality that there are these categorical reasons. There are reasons to behave in certain ways versus other. So that's not just a matter of opinion. There are facts about what there are reasons to do. And these may be among the reasons that there's nothing deeper to say. But there are also philosophers who believe there is something more to say. And again, unsurprisingly, different philosophers will disagree about what that deeper story looks like. Let me give a very quick sketch of one such story. I think it's not bad as far as it goes. Ultimately, I think there's even more to say, but that would take us a rather long time to say that more. So let me just give you the quick sketch. It's a version of the view that's known as contractarianism. The thought is that the moral rules are the rules that we would give to one another to govern our interactions with one another, the rules that we would agree to if we were to set about trying to settle on a bunch of rules to govern our interactions under the assumption that we were perfectly rational. Nobody wants to follow rules that people accept because of mistakes in their reasoning. So imagine us, but soup ourselves up to be reasoning perfectly rational beings would agree to various rules to govern their interactions. And the rules that they agree to are the terms of morality. Now, there's different ways of running this contractarian thought. One version of it, which I have some sympathies to, adds an extra twist. The reasoning needs to take place behind a so-called veil of ignorance. The thought is, I'm not going to know while I'm engaged in this hypothetical bargaining session what my actual position in society is. I won't be able to try to rig things in favor of white males because I won't know that I'm a white male. So I argue from behind this veil of ignorance about my actual identity. So that's the basic thought. So here we have a kind of deeper story. Where do the moral rules come from? They are the rules we would give to ourselves to govern our behavior with one another insofar as we were perfectly rational. Does this capture a notion of objectivity for ethics? Seems to me the answer is yes. There's a fact of the matter about what it would be rational for us to agree to in terms of these rules. One might wonder, is the output of this hypothetical, imaginary bargaining session, are the moral rules necessary? Maybe that's another feature we're looking for in trying to genuinely get morality as opposed to merely the illusion or appearance of morality. And the answer to that is yes, I believe they are necessary. Now, if you're a non-foundationalist, if you don't think there is a deeper story of the contractarian sort that I sketched, or some other deeper story that other moral philosophers have sketched, if you're a non-foundationalist, you might just stop it right here. You might say, to say that murder is wrong is to say that there's a categorical reason not to murder. And this isn't a contingent truth, it's a necessary truth. It's a truth that obtains, as philosophers like to put it, in all possible worlds, that murder would be wrong. If we do go the contractarian route, then we instead might put our necessity a little bit deeper. We might say something like, the moral truths are necessary, but their truth is itself explained in terms of the social contract, and that in turn is explained in terms of the fact that there are certain truths about reasoning, and these are necessary truths. It's a necessary fact that perfectly rational beings would reason about what kinds of rules they wanted to give to one another in such and such a way. So I think we can get the necessity of morality as well. Here's a rather different objection that might get raised. We have the thought that morality involves commandments. We have the thought that morality involves requirements. We talk about moral laws. So sometimes it's suggested that where there's a commandment, there's got to be a commander. Where there's a law, there's got to be a lawgiver. Where there's a requirement, there's got to be a requirer. Who plays the role of commander, lawgiver, requirer? Well, it's got to be God. And so it turns out if we're really going to have the notion not just of moral reason to behave in this way or that way, but rather moral requirements to behave in one way rather than another way, then we need to appeal to God after all, to be the lawgiver. This is an argument that's been proposed by various theistic philosophers. Indeed, this very argument's been embraced by some atheistic philosophers who said, yeah, talk of moral requirements does presuppose a lawgiver. Now that I no longer believe in God, I believe there are no moral requirements. Now, I'm not myself inclined to go that way. I'm perfectly prepared to talk about moral requirements. I think it's a completely appropriate thing to do. In fact, it would be inappropriate, it would be just simply mistaken, full stop, to give up talk about moral requirements. So the question I want to push a little bit is it really true that requirements require a requirer? That's a mouthful. And I'm inclined to believe the answer to that is actually no. Let's take an example of a requirement outside the moral domain. I suppose that when we are engaged in reasoning about belief matters, theoretical reasoning, it's a requirement of appropriate reasoning that you not contradict yourself. People sometimes talk about the law of non-contradiction. I take this to be a requirement of rationality, that you not contradict yourself. Now, should we similarly conclude that since there's a requirement, there's a law of non-contradiction, there must be a lawgiver, there must be some cosmic logician who commands us not to contradict ourselves? Doesn't seem to me to be so. I mean, I can imagine that somebody does say that, but I don't myself feel the force of thinking if there's a law of non-contradiction, that is just to say that it's a claim that it's just fundamentally irrational to contradict yourself, I don't see any reason to conclude from that there must be some cosmic logician laying down that law. As we might put it, the logic of the word requirement does not actually entail the existence of a requirer. That's at least seems to me the most natural thing to say about the law of non-contradiction. If we want, we can say, I don't think any harm in saying that reason itself requires that you not contradict yourself. And that's fine. I don't have any problem talking that way. That just, of course, doesn't I mean, it's talking about reason in a somewhat personified fashion, but no harm done as long as we understand there doesn't actually have to be a person who laid down the law of non-contradiction. Well, similarly then, I want to say that with regard to the various moral requirements, we don't need a lawgiver for them to be genuine requirements. If we want, we can say, and in fact, it seems to be a perfectly legitimate thing to say, that reason requires that we act in accordance with reasons. It lays down these various categorical reasons not to harm people, to aid them. And so we can personify reason in that way, but all we just mean, I think, is that there are these compelling, decisive, objective, categorical reasons to behave in certain ways and not behave in other ways, or to reason in various ways. So I myself am skeptical of the claim that commandments require a commander, or requirements require a requirer, or that law requires a lawgiver. So some of you may be more sympathetic to that suggestion than I am. Indeed, some of my colleagues are more sympathetic to that suggestion than I am. It's important to bear in mind that although I have the particular views I'm laying down here, it's not as though all non-theistic philosophers think about these issues in exactly the same way. If you brought up four of us, you'd probably get four different stories about how to ground morality in a secular fashion. Some of my colleagues are more sympathetic to the thought that talk of moral requirement really does entail that there be somebody who's commanding us to behave accordingly. And then we might ask, well, if that's so, who could it be besides God? And the answer I want to give on behalf of those of you and my colleagues who are sympathetic to the suggestion, the answer should be all of us. We, the members of the moral community, are the ones who are laying down these requirements. That idea is especially, I think, a natural fit if we accept the contractarian theory that I was sketching, albeit too quickly, sketching in my earlier remarks. If we think of the rules of morality as emerging from this hypothetical session in which we ask ourselves, how shall we behave towards one another? Except we face this question hypothetically in the mode of perfect rationality. What would perfectly rational beings lay down as these rules? But these are rules that nonetheless we are giving to one another. Then when somebody, and we enter into these rules freely, because we see that it makes sense for us to reach these agreements. You can see why it would be rational for us to agree to rules requiring telling the truth, laying out, forbidding lying, forbidding murder, and so forth. Then these are rules that we give to one another. And consequently, if somebody breaks those rules, they're not upholding their part of the social contract. And as such, the rest of us who are indeed limiting our behavior in keeping with this agreement, we can appropriately and with due authority turn to the person who's acting immorally and saying, you shouldn't behave that way. You're not keeping up your end of the bargain. So if you think there needs to be somebody who's demanding of us that we act morally, the answer could be, well, there is. Each one of us is demanding of everybody else, and indeed demanding of ourselves as well, that we act morally. So if you think requirements need a requirer, the answer could be, well, here's a requirer. It's the members of the moral community. Well, obviously, there's a great deal more that needs to be said about all of these subjects, but I've used up my allotted 20 minutes. But I hope you can at least see the outlines of an approach. There are alternatives. An approach which offers us a fairly plausible, I think, account of what morality is all about, under which the rules of morality are not an illusion. They're not a mere matter of opinion. They are indeed a matter of objective fact. And consequently, I'm inclined to think that moral philosophers of an atheistic inclination are completely entitled to believe that we can have morality without God. Thank you.
Hell yeah. It's a nice change of pace from the last debate where I felt like the three of us were, I don't know, we were like a troop of gibbons just throwing our philosophical poop at the at the debaters, trying to like add in what Hitchens should have said or where Craig was going wrong. Here it's like, no, he's doing a great job. But I will say, he doesn't take an approach that I would have liked to see him take. Maybe he brings this up later on in the debate, but it seems to me that instead of doing what he does, which is kind of saying, hey, here's an example of an atheistic moral philosophy that seems to make sense, he could have asked the question, how do you think God helps any of this?
Yeah, exactly.
Put Craig on his back foot and demanded, what role does God play in doing the things that Kagan laid out? Like, how does God establish the foundation for morality? How does he give moral terms their meaning, and so on and so forth?
Yeah, right. So I think that there was absolutely. Like if like he's actually taking on himself a much harder thing here, which makes this really impressive opening statement, which is sort of going through all the ways that you can make sense of the idea that morality is objective without God, anticipating possible, objections to those ways, responding to the objections. I mean, it's a virtuoso performance. But yeah, I had the exact same thought. Like what I really wanted him to say was just like, look, let's just take it as a given that this is a really hard philosophical problem, how to make sense of objective morality, how to make sense of where, if you want to talk this way, like we talked about last time, I think neither of us particularly like this way of talking, but where morality or normativity or whatever comes from. But okay, how is adding God supposed to help with that hard philosophical problem?
Yeah. The way he started just by saying he spends all of his time, and again, he does a great job of doing this, of like just giving a surface view of different ways you might try to make sense of morality without God. But the fact that he spent the whole time doing that, he just seems to sort of be granting to Craig that if you had God, that would explain where morality came from. So yeah, he really should at least throw in a little bit, just say, look, this is as big a problem if you're a theist as it is if you're an atheist. Being a theist doesn't make this problem any easier.
I suspect that, like, rhetorically, this is probably the better path to take, because, especially given the audience here at the Veritas Forum, they want to see how this trick can be pulled off.
Yeah.
And the fact that Kagan can pull it off, that's impressive.
Mm-hmm.
But, it's sort of like watching debates about evolution and God. You have some biologists come in and in painstaking detail try to give the audience a feel for how we might get the complexity of the biological world without any divine interference. But there too, nobody ever brings up the really big question for the anti-Darwinian theist, namely, wait, how do you think God made life? Like, do you have any explanation for how that, God?
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Bewitched, or no? This is Samantha.
Yeah, right. That they that if you're that saying God did it, oftentimes feels like an explanation because we're acculturated to receive it that way. But it's not like that's not an alternative explanation. That's just sort of asserting that somehow or another it's explained. It's explained by saying this. Of course, you could say, well, I believe that God somehow or another brings it about that the complexity of life we see on Earth, exists. I don't know how he does it, but look, if you get to play that game, right, you can say, I believe that life on Earth, complexity of life on Earth somehow or another arose naturally. I don't know quite how, and it's not obvious what the asymmetry is supposed to be there. And I think in the morality case, it's even more stark. I know we did this. I know we did this the last time, but I think because it is so very relevant, and because Kagan. Well, whereas I mean, I'd be pretty surprised if it never came up at any point in the course of the debate. Didn't go this way. Then it's somebody want to fill in the Euthyphro objection is the sort of like this is the big thing that has convinced even lots of theistic philosophers that it doesn't really make sense to talk in terms of God being the source or somehow creating morality.
Just real quick before we do that, it's important to note that Samantha did her magic by wiggling her nose. This was Jeannie from I Dream of Jeannie.
And I'm so fucking embarrassed.
Yeah.
If you need to do the stream now.
Yeah. They should probably rescind my PhD. That was
you can redeem yourself by doing the Euthyphro Dilemma.
Yeah, so the Euthyphro Dilemma comes from
Plato,
Platonic dialogue.
Jesus Christ, Mark, you know anything.
Where Socrates gets into this discussion with Euthyphro, who's a lawyer who is, it turns out, prosecuting his own father for a charge of murder. And so Socrates, being Socrates, is like, wow, Euthyphro, you're really like confident that you're doing the right thing here, right? And Euthyphro's like, yeah, kind of a badass. So Socrates, being Socrates, says, okay, tell me, what is it? What makes something good? And he says, what makes something holy, but let's translate it into modern terms. What makes something good? And Euthyphro says, well, something's good if the gods love it. We can translate that, again, modern terms. Something is good if God commands it. The God commands it. And then Socrates asks this question that has kind of echoed through the ages. We're still wrestling with variations on this question, like in metaethics in my field. He says, wait, does God command something because it's good, or is it good because he commands it? And this is the dilemma. And it turns out, if you think carefully about these two options, they're both deeply problematic. Very briefly, and I think maybe Ben, if you're okay, let's keep it brief, because I bet some of these problems are going to come up later on.
I'm sure it'll come up. Yeah.
But very briefly, if you take the first horn and say God commands these things because they're good, God tells us don't steal because stealing is wrong, honor your parents because it's good, then it seems like you've abandoned divine command theory. You've admitted that these things are good or bad on their own separately. And so if we need an account of goodness or badness, God isn't going to give it to us.
Yeah. So then you're right where Kagan is. You've got to come up with some other kind of account of what grounds morality.
And you might want to say, okay, there is some other account, but God's, super smart, so he knows the account and we should trust him. But that's a point about a moral epistemology, and not moral.
That's about how we know what's good and bad, not about what makes it good.
Yeah.
And bad,
On the other hand,
yeah,
if you say it's good because God commands it, there's just a whole slew of problems that follow from that commitment. One of which is, well, what if God had commanded something else? What if God commanded puppy killing?
I always use that example in classes too, like torturing puppies.
Yeah, right. And if you and crucially, if oftentimes when people first hear this, like their gut reaction is, this is a silly hypothetical because God wouldn't command puppy killing because God is good and puppy killing is bad. But of course, if that's what you're thinking, then you've already rejected the idea that God somehow creates or is the source of morality.
Yeah, you've already gone for the other horn of the dilemma right then as soon as you say that.
Yeah, because you're saying that it's that it's bad. The badness of killing is not just a function of God's disapproval of it. It's God disapproves of it because it's bad. And actually, Kagan's analogy between morality and logic is particularly good here, and also, always tickles me, because I think of Jesse Lee Peterson demanding to know where logic comes from. But there was a. We did a whole thing about this on the Michael Brooks show, and we did a viewer.
Is that the beta guy?
Yeah. Beta. And
he really had your number.
And
where's logic come from, Beta? Come on.
And so we did this. We did a whole thing about it on the Michael Brooks show. We did this poll with options like Allah and the balls. Candidate based on where logic comes from, but I did run with the analogy here and do I think the Euthyphro argument there is really striking, right? Okay, so can you have a law of non-contradiction? Contradictions can never be true without a lawgiver. If not, I think that God could have just decided to have it be the case that contradictions could be true, like that. I mean, you could bite that bullet, but that'd be a really weird view.
I just want to make one more little point, because Ben, earlier you said that you think part of what's going on is that we're just enculturated to accept divine explanations. I kind of suspect that it's even deeper than that. It's not just a cultural point, but maybe a point about human psychology. There's a reason that cultures across time and space have reached for agential explanations of natural phenomena. Why is there thunder? Well, it's Thor. I think there might be something about human psychology that when you put an agent behind some phenomena, we feel like we've gotten an explanation.
Yeah, if you can point to a mind, because we're used to talking about other people causing things. So if you can point to some sort of thing that's like a mind as having done it, that feels like an explanation, even when you lack the sort of further explanation of how that mind would bring it about. Yeah, I think that's likely true. You've redeemed yourself for mixing up those two shows, and also for forgetting who Plato was.
I knew who Plato was. I was trying to think. Can I say Platonic dialogue? Is that going to sound right? And then you fucking Gibbon started throwing your shit at me.
That's fair. I should also say, somebody brought up in the chat, and this is something that people who I respect enough to sometimes wonder if I'm missing something about how the move works will sometimes say in response to the Euthyphro Dilemma, which is that, it's that somehow it's supposed to be addressed by saying that God's moral choices flow from God's nature,
that's Craig's move.
That's Craig's move too, right? But it's weird that this is his move, because in the original Euthyphro Dilemma, it's not about commands; it's about the God's nature. It's about what the gods love and what they don't love.
The original dilemma is about that, Yeah, no, that's a really good point, and also it just sort of it always just seemed to me like this just obviously pushed the question back one level in a way that doesn't really help, because I mean, even if that had been the historical order of priority, like that, because if you say, well, God is by his nature compassionate or something like that, okay, well, I mean, we can just switch from deontology, argue about what the rules are, to axiology, argue about what the right values are, and have exactly the same problem, right? So if God's nature had been cruelty rather than compassion, would cruelty then be a good moral value? And it doesn't seem like that plays out any differently at that point.
Yeah.
All right. All right, we'll pretend to believe that that Mark knew who Plato was, and we'll move on to Dr. Craig's opening presentation.
We'll pretend that he's ever watched an episode of Bewitched in his life too.
That's actually more embarrassing.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I didn't realize it had been that many Veritas Forum events over these years. Good evening, and thank you very much. I am delighted to have the invitation from the Veritas Forum to participate in the dialogue tonight. And I want to say it's a tremendous privilege to be sharing the podium with so eminent an ethicist as Shelly Kagan. The question before us this evening is God necessary for morality? Notice what the question is not asking. We are not asking whether belief in God is necessary for morality. No one in tonight's discussion is arguing that in order to live a moral life, you need to believe in God. Rather, the question, as Shelley emphasized, is whether God is necessary for morality. And the answer to that question, I think, obviously depends on what you mean by morality. If by morality you mean simply a certain pattern of social behavior prevalent among human beings, then obviously this sort of behavior could still go on even if it turned out that God does not exist. God isn't necessary in order for human beings to exhibit certain patterns of social behavior, which they call acting morally. But if by morality you mean that certain things are really good or evil, that certain actions are unconditionally obligatory or impermissible, then many atheists and theists alike agree that God is indeed necessary for morality. In the absence of God, morality turns out to be just a human convention or illusion. The same patterns of social behavior might go on without God, but it would be a delusion to think that such behavior has any objective moral significance. Accordingly, I'm going to argue that God is necessary for morality in at least three distinct ways. Without God, objective moral values, moral duties, and moral accountability would not exist. Let's look at the first point. If God does not exist, objective moral values do not exist. Now, when we talk about moral values, we're talking about whether something is good or evil. To say that there are objective moral values is to say that something is good or evil independently of whether anybody believes it to be so. To say, for example, that the Holocaust was objectively evil is to say that it was evil, even though the Nazis who carried it out thought that it was good. And it would still have been evil, even if the Nazis had won World War II and succeeded in brainwashing or exterminating everybody who disagreed with them, so that everyone believed the Holocaust was good. My first claim is that if there is no God, then moral values are not objective in that sense. Traditionally, objective moral values have been based in God, who is the highest good. He is the locus and paradigm of moral value. God's own holy and loving nature supplies the absolute standard against which all actions are measured. He is by nature loving, generous, just, faithful, kind, and so forth. And thus, if God exists, objective moral values exist. But if God does not exist, what basis remains for objective moral values? In particular, why think that human beings would have moral worth? On the atheistic view, human beings are just accidental byproducts of nature, which have evolved relatively recently on an infinitesimal speck of dust called the planet Earth, lost somewhere in a hostile and mindless universe in which are doomed to perish individually and collectively in a relatively short time. On atheism, I can't see any reason to think that human well-being is objectively good, any more than insect well-being or dog well-being or monkey well-being. On a naturalistic view, moral values are just the byproduct of biological evolution and social conditioning.
I do want to mostly wait till the end of the statements, not interrupt every 2 minutes, but I do want to just slip in here that it is very strange that he thinks that it's that we all just sort of take it for granted that there's no moral significance whatsoever to the well-being of other sentient animals.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Oh, actually, can I
Just as a true
a quick thing? Knowing Craig, he likes to use the word just, like according to the naturalistic conception of blah, 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 this thing that we think is really important, like morality or choices or, whatever, they're just chemicals reacting or whatever. That word, I'm highlighting this for the audience. That word just is doing a lot of work.
Right.
It's worth asking yourself as you listen to him saying this, what work is he doing by inserting that just in there? Because yes, as a naturalist, in some sense, I will agree that our moral inclinations are the product of our animal natures and the interactions of chemicals in our brains, but that just does work that I'm not willing to accept.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think you could maybe even sharpen the point by thinking about analogies to other much more esoteric and maybe silly philosophical debates that people might not be familiar with here. Like, like there are people who would say, because philosophy makes people say strange things. There are people who'd insist that like there's no such thing as this glass of whiskey. There are only protons and electrons arranged glass of whiskey lie.
Yes, no glass of whiskey. Yeah,
and you could use the same rhetorical strategy here to say that somehow or another saying that God exists is going to help you make sense of the existence of glasses of whiskey. That if the atheist is right, that there are just protons and electrons, arranged whiskey-wise. There are no glasses of whiskey. But I think in that case, it's a little bit easier to say that. One, to see Mark's point about the just, right? That you just, just because you think that it's ultimately protons and electrons doesn't mean you don't think that protons and electrons can constitute glasses of whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
And similarly, you could say, just because I believe that, only material things exist doesn't mean that I believe that certain things about, possible arrangements of those material things aren't right or wrong. And it also, I think, usefully shows the point about how strange it is to think that saying God exists is supposed to, like, if you think this is a big problem, how to make sense of glasses of whiskey, then obviously saying God exists isn't going to make it less of a problem.
That's
and
right.
It also shouldn't make it less of a problem. If you think it's a big philosophical problem, how to make sense of objective morality, saying God exists also shouldn't help with that.
Well,
Yeah.
Even without, appealing to insane philosophical, theories of metaphysics, imagine that that Ryan, imagine that people are trying to they're struggling with the idea of like, how can paintings have such strong impact on us emotionally? And Ryan is a supernaturalist about paintings, and I'm a naturalist. And so we look at the Mona Lisa, and Ryan turns to me and he says, how can you think that that's all just natural, that there's no magic involved? According to you, that painting is just material on a canvas, right?
Yeah.
To which I think everyone would say, since there aren't any supernaturalists about paintings that I know of, You'd say,
might be talking me into the position now.
yeah, it's kind of compelling.
Yeah.
You would say, hey, that word just, it's doing a lot of work, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was also gonna, I mean, to take something like, if you want to make a move really closely analogous to the one he just made, like replace morality with like humans doing math or humans doing logic, right? So like me saying 2 + 2 is 4, well, that's just a bunch of neurons firing in an evolved monkey brain. So if there's no God, my saying 2 + 2 = 4 has no meaning or has no objective meaning unless there's a God to give it objective meaning. That would be like a parallel argument with mathematics. And that doesn't seem compelling at all, right? That the fact that I'm a monkey who evolved and that my saying 2 + 2 = 4 is in some sense just these evolved neurons firing in a certain way doesn't tell us anything one way or the other about whether that claim is objectively true or not. And the exact same thing is true of morality or logic or anything else we might say.
Isn't that
Troop of
kind of what
baboons.
the argument- I'm sorry.
Oh, no, go for it.
It's not important. It's not important.
No, I want to hear.
Well, I was going to say, isn't that actually an argument that that what's his face makes? Shit, what's his name? Plantinga makes that kind of argument that like if we are the products of natural selection,
he does make that move.
Trust that 2 + 2 = 4.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's always seemed dumb when he makes that move. I don't find it compelling whatsoever. It just
right. Like I think Plantinga's. I mean, I don't find it very compelling, but I think his version of it is like there's a little bit more going on than this. Is he? Because well, I mean, it's also it's not a metaphysical argument or a semantic argument that it doesn't mean anything to say that 2 + 2 = 4 if we're just
Oh, that's right. He's making more of an epistemological argument, isn't he?
Yeah. He's saying that we shouldn't trust that our puny monkey brains would be able to figure out. I don't know. Maybe he thinks we can figure out the 2 + 2 = 4, but certainly the idea is that this is supposed to. It's the evolutionary argument against naturalism that we shouldn't trust our conclusions about these big philosophical topics because of our puny monkey brains. So therefore, like naturalistic atheism is self-refuted. Whereas if our brains were created by God and God seeks to people, he wants us to be able to have knowledge of him, and then it's that the theist doesn't face the same problem. That's his argument.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I should say real quick that earlier we were talking about we were talking about the A and B theory of time, and so the GTA graphic designer Jandrew World very quickly threw this together. So this is an illustration of the B theory of time. It's the B theory of time.
Oh, Jesus!
This is my kind of. I'm mad I didn't come up with this. This is my kind of comic. This should be a chaos pet, but
yeah. That is very much a Ryan Lake joke. So all right. Let's go back to the page.
Exhibit cooperative and even altruistic behavior because natural selection has determined it to be advantageous in the struggle for survival. So their primate cousins, Homo sapiens, have similarly evolved behavior for the same reason. As a result of sociobiological pressures, there has evolved among Homo sapiens a sort of herd morality which functions well in the perpetuation of our species. But on an atheistic view, there doesn't seem to be anything that makes this morality objectively true. The philosopher of science, Michael Ruse, reports, the position of the modern evolutionist is that humans have an awareness of morality because such an awareness is of biological worth. Morality is a biological adaptation, no less than our hands and feet and teeth. Considered as a rationally justifiable set of claims about an objective something, ethics is illusory. I appreciate that when somebody says, love thy neighbor as thyself, they think they are referring above and beyond themselves. Nevertheless, such reference is truly without foundation. Morality is just an aid to survival and reproduction, and any deeper meaning is illusory, end quote. If we were to rewind the film of human evolution back to the beginning and start anew, people with a very different set of moral values might well have evolved. As Darwin himself wrote in The Descent of Man, if men were raised under precisely the same conditions as hive bees, there can hardly be a doubt that our unmarried females would, like the worker bees, think it a sacred duty to kill their brothers, and mothers would strive to kill their fertile daughters, and no one would think of interfering. For us to think that human beings are special and our morality objectively true is to succumb to the temptation of speciesism. That is to say, an unjustified bias toward one's own species. The objective worthlessness of human beings on a naturalistic worldview is underscored by two implications of that worldview: materialism and determinism. Naturalists are typically materialists or physicalists who regard man as a purely animal organism. But if there is no mind distinct from the brain, then everything we think and do is determined by the input of our five senses and our genetic makeup. There is no personal agent who freely decides to do something. But without freedom.
All right, I know what I said earlier, but I have to say this is another weird leap. That he's saying that if you're not a dualist, if you think that there isn't, that you don't think that minds are this separate non-physical thing that's just somehow linked up to your physical brain, then you have to believe in physical determinism. But of course that's just a weird non sequitur. There's no
It's a total. I mean, there are some very prominent and intelligent and thoughtful. I mean, going back to the free will debate, there are libertarians, a number of libertarians who, Robert Kane is the most well-known example probably, but a lot of others, John Lemos, a lot of other people who give totally secular accounts of free will, just appealing to purely physical principles without any reference to dualism or anything else. So you're exactly right. It just nothing follows from materialism to anything about determinism or anything else.
Yeah, for sure. So points to Antonio for the Carl Pilkington. That's a classic for the Ricky Gervais show. It's not right because the issue. I mean, insofar as you think you can only make sense of free will if determinism is false, which obviously is a hugely controversial assumption in itself. But even insofar as you think that, you could think that there's no non-physical mind that's separate from the brain, but still think that our brain states aren't entirely physically determined, and and have some complex explanation like Robert Kane would give of how they check the boxes for a libertarian theory of free will. So he's mashing together a lot of subjects and in a very bad way here.
Yeah, which he's very prone to doing in general.
He is. Yeah. Right. I mean, in his presentation of the first cause argument for the existence of God, he has this really weird thing at the end about how he sort of gets up to the point of saying that whatever the cause is of the universe can't be a deterministic thing, and he has a whole argument for that. therefore it must be like a personal mind. It's like, whoa. Right?
Yeah. Like, all right, like maybe there are one or two other options we can consider before you leap to that one.
As long as we're pausing here, it's, I guess, worth drawing the connection to what he's doing right now to the stuff that we talked about with the Euthyphro Dilemma. The first feature of real morality that he wants to establish is objectivity, by which he means that moral truth is not contingent on the mere opinions or inclinations of one person or one culture or something like that. But notice that if you take that second horn of the Euthyphro Dilemma, that is, if you say that something is good because God commands it, you, I think, are committed to a kind of cosmic subjectivism.
That's right.
About morality.
That's right. Yeah, if you want it to be objective and like truly true, independent of what anyone thinks, it can't be true because God thinks it any more than it can be true because some group of people or some individual thinks it.
Yeah, right, exactly. That if if the Nazis had won World War II and also Thor agrees with them,
yeah,
that's not
that's right.
Which actually like to be still snotty, but slightly more serious. Like it's I think that is a useful way of seeing the problem. That if sure, technically, if you define like morality as subjective as the view that it's that if you define moral objectivity as the view that morality doesn't depend on the preferences of any arbitrary preferences of any human, then sure, God would solve that. But also, if Vulcans existed, and we could just say, oh well, morality is whatever the Vulcans say it is, and that would satisfy that requirement, not rely on the preferences of any human. And actually, I think that does usefully get down to like why divine command ethics is just as subjective. If you're saying it relies on the subjective preferences of a being, then it doesn't seem like that's different. And again, even if you go this route of saying, well, it's about God's nature, not his preferences, like, okay, so we could just pick, we could just say we could have Mark command theory where as long as Mark's commands, flowed from Mark's moral nature, then that was what was morally correct. And that seems beside the point.
Whatever Mark loves is pious. Yep.
There is I think, a relevant and important distinction between the commands of Mark and the commands of the Vulcans and the commands of God for Craig. It's something that he gestured towards at the beginning of this bit, where he's kind of framing what he's going to talk about. So it's going to come out later. And I think it has to do with questions of authority. So I'm just making a gesture to that right now because my suspicion is that the way he cashes out those questions of authority are going to be morally really problematic.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Euthyphro cuts at the question of authority too, right? Because if you want God's authority not to just be like the authority of a dictator, you want to say he's an authority because he's a perfect source of knowledge about morality, not just he's laying down the law in the way a dictator would.
Yeah, right. I always think of there's this classic Twilight Zone episode with this little kid who is all powerful and he's isolated off, his little town from the rest of the world, and everybody lives in fear of him because he can turn people into Jack in the Boxes and things like that. And also, every time he does something, it's good. It's good that he did that, right? Like that's if presumably you don't want. You don't want the authority of God to be like the authority of that kid.
Yeah,
that it's like, well, you're afraid of him because he's in a position to punish you, right? You want there to be some deeper thing where you feel, you feel good about that, right? Like it could very well be that kid has the power to make you suffer for all eternity. But we wouldn't, that doesn't mean that we morally admire people who go along with the kid's dictates,
right?
and we morally condemn people who defy him, even if it means that they are going to suffer for all eternity.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's go.
None of our choices is morally significant. They're like the jerks of a puppet's limbs, controlled by the strings of sensory input and physical constitution. And what moral value does a puppet or its movements have? Richard Dawkins' assessment of human worth may be depressing, but why on atheism is he mistaken when he says there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pointless indifference. We are machines for propagating DNA. It is every living object's sole reason for being. If there is no God, then any basis for regarding the herd morality evolved by Homo sapiens as objectively true seems to have been removed. Take God out of the picture, and all you seem to be left with is an ape-like creature on a tiny speck of dust beset with delusions of moral grandeur. Secondly, if God does not exist, objective moral duties do not exist. Duties have to do with whether something is right or wrong. Now, you might think at first that the distinction between right and wrong is the same as the distinction between good and evil. But if you think about it, you can see that this is not the case. Duty has to do with moral obligation, with what I ought or ought not to do. But obviously, you're not morally obligated to do something just because it would be good for you to do it. For example, it would be good for you to become a doctor, but you're not morally obligated to become a doctor. After all, it would also be good for you to become a firefighter or a homemaker or a diplomat, but you can't do them all. So there's a difference between moral values and moral duties. Now, my claim is that if God does not exist, then it seems we have no objective duties. To say,
yeah, I believe so. Yeah. Since we're paused, by the way, I do just want to say that there is like a rhetorical sleight of hand when he's talking about puppets, right? Because he's like, oh, if we're just if we're determined, our actions are determined by physical processes that make us puppies. Puppets.
Nothing wrong with being puppies.
Yeah. That makes us all just like adorable, confused puppies. Which
I'd have less objection if he was framing it that way.
That, like, yeah, because it's are they really doing anything good or bad? I don't know. I just want to protect them all, like all little puppies. But what moral significance does a puppet have? There's a sleight of hand, because it's like, because sure, metaphorically, you can say if we're determined we're like puppets. But the reason we don't think that puppets have moral significance is not that they're determined; it's that we don't think that they have the ability to suffer. That we don't think they have the ability to have positive experiences. So they don't seem to be within the realm of the kind of thing our moral intuitions are about.
Yeah. All the work is being done by these metaphors and by all these big claims that he's not arguing for at all. He's just asserting that all this stuff is entailed by a materialistic worldview. And I mean, these are just, to say the least, these are not obviously true claims. These are very controversial claims that a lot of philosophers reject. He's just asserting it, just sliding it in there without any kind of argument.
Yeah, exactly. All right.
to say that we have objective moral duties is again to say that we have certain moral obligations regardless of whether we think that we do. Traditionally, our moral duties were thought to spring from God's commandments, such as the Ten Commandments. Far from being arbitrary, these commands flow necessarily from his moral nature. On this foundation, we can affirm the objective rightness of love, generosity, self-sacrifice, and equality, and condemn as objectively wrong selfishness, hatred, abuse, discrimination, and oppression. But if there is no God, what basis remains for objective moral duties? On the atheistic view, human beings are just animals, and animals have no moral obligations to one another. When a lion kills a zebra, it kills the zebra, but it doesn't murder the zebra. When a great white shark forcibly copulates with a female, it forcibly copulates with her, but it does not rape her, for there is no moral dimension to these actions. They are neither prohibited nor obligatory. So if God does not exist, why think that we have any moral obligations to do anything? Who or what imposes these moral duties upon us? Where did they come from? It's very
this
hard
was
to
answered
see
already.
why they would be anything more than a subjective impression ingrained into us by societal and parental conditioning. On the atheistic view, certain actions, such as incest or rape, may not be biologically and socially advantageous, and so in the course of human development have become taboo. They go against the social contract that Shelley has imagined. But that does absolutely nothing to show that rape and incest is really wrong. Such behavior goes on all the time in the animal kingdom. On the atheistic view, the rapist who flouts the herd morality or the social contract is doing nothing more serious than acting unfashionably, like the man who flouts etiquette.
Okay,
By belching loudly at the dinner table.
Okay, we've got to pause here for a second. I mean, this is as bad as what Hitch did in the last debate that we talked about, where he's just not even beginning to engage with anything Shelley just said. Shelley just gave a plausible account of an atheistic morality. You know, I mean, so to take the kind of Rawlsian thing he did, like a community of rational agents coming up with rules that we would agree to under fair conditions. That account answers every objection that he's raising here. And he's just pretending like Shelley didn't say any of the things that he just said.
Yeah.
He's reacting some other straw man version of atheist morality.
Just to highlight, I mean, just to make it really clear for those watching, it answers it because presumably most animals are not capable of recognizing reasons to not murder or rape or whatever, but we are, and so we're on the hook in a way that they're not.
Yeah.
Not because we're magical beings.
Not because we're magical, because we're at least to some degree rational agents that can have these kinds of conversations and recognize these reasons. And sharks aren't. You don't need any magic to say that.
Which also, by the way, nicely speaks to his whole spiel about free will, right? Mm-hmm. We can also be natural creatures that can recognize reasons to act. And I mean, Ryan, this is your stuff, but in that lies a kind of moral responsibility that is at the heart of what it is to have free will.
That's right. Yeah, you can give a similar kind of account of moral responsibility. You can have moral duty, and I'm saying duty on purpose.
You say duty like dookie?
Dookie, yeah, moral dookie and moral responsibility, very similar. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And it's also worth pointing out, like, I mean, presumably, if God does exist, the explanation of why humans are morally responsible, you know, or capable of being morally responsible, great white sharks aren't, is exactly the same.
Yeah.
You know, like,
exactly. Yeah.
Like nothing changes when you say, and also God exists, you know.
No, that's because there's no shark God.
That's right. This is why it's true. There's no shark ethics and no shark responsibility because there's no shark Thor to lay down the law for sharks.
Yeah.
If there were shark Thor, Andrew, get on this. We want a shark Thor before the end of this stream.
Surprisingly, there is a giraffe god.
There is the giraffe god. Giraffes can be morally culpable, when they do wrong things. Humans.
All right, we're fully back in given mode here.
Yeah. But it is like, this is really worth highlighting that.
It is.
You could there's no connection, between any of these claims. Like you could. I mean, if first of all, there's nothing about theism that gives you, that gives you libertarian free will. You could say that that God created a deterministic universe, and then there's no okay, if you think that human behavior isn't entirely determined, and shark behavior isn't is, and hence sharks can't be morally responsible, but humans can be, then nothing about that explanation hinges on the existence of God, and nothing would be any different, with or without, theism being in the picture. Mm-hmm. It's they're like five different things that are all being treated as if they were the same subject here.
Yep.
I mean, it's the same thing. How does God help make sense for us of a libertarian conception of free will? From a naturalistic perspective, you look at Robert Kane, who goes to great lengths to show that there may be some interpretations of quantum mechanics that allows for some sort of non-deterministic free will, and if you wanted to, hear the formula and all that. But if we're libertarians by way of God, the question still remains: how does God give us free will? Mm-hmm. And the answer, is Samantha from.
He gives us. Mark, no, stop it.
The answer is the one that Plato gives.
That's not Plato. Plato wiggled his nose. Aristotle did this move.
Yeah. All right. Fair enough. So yeah. I mean, this thing, and again, it was all very frustrating because in his initial thing, Shelly Kagan laid out this contractualist view of morality. That's all about having reasons and acting on reasons, which presumably we don't think sharks can do. And he also did this whole thing. He did 5 minutes on this exact issue, anticipated the exact rhetorical flourish that Craig is making here about, well, if there's no lawgiver, how can you have laws? And he went through the whole thing, which makes this, very weird and frustrating. But
it's also weird because Kagan's not actually a contractarian. Mm-hmm. He was just saying, for example, here's one particular theory. It's not mine. It's actually, I wish that he'd highlight this a little bit, but it's not mine, but it does answer a lot of these questions just by way of showing, hey, these secular moral philosophies can actually address a lot of these issues that you're bringing up.
That's right. Yeah, he was just trying to anticipate, if you're the kind of theist who's obsessed on equating morality with laws, well, here's one kind of secular theory that can give you that thing that you want.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Let's see if we can make it to the end of a statement.
If there is no moral lawgiver, then there is no objective moral law which we must obey. It's all a matter of social convention on a par with rules of etiquette. Thirdly, if God does not exist, then there is no basis for moral accountability. Traditionally, it's been held that God holds all persons morally accountable for their actions. Despite the inequities of this life, in the end, the scales of God's justice will be balanced. And thus, the moral choices that we make in this life have an eternal significance. But if God does not exist, what basis remains for moral accountability? Even if there were objective duties and values under atheism, they seem to be irrelevant because there's no moral accountability.
Yes, there it is.
Ends at the grave, then ultimately it makes no difference whether you live as a Stalin or as a Mother Teresa. As the Russian writer Fyodor Dostoevsky.
Just what a morally bankrupt conception of, I mean, look, the fact that our good deeds are not rewarded often and that unjust people often go unpunished
makes it more admirable to act morally.
Yeah, it actually gives it more value, not less.
It's this deep, it's this existential point that we all must wrestle with, right? And when you make a moral choice that you know is not going to be rewarded, by my life, that's when you're really making the moral choice.
Yeah, that's when you really deserve some praise, not when, oh, well, I knew I was going to be held accountable by God, and so that's why I
mean, this is
adhere to this moral rule. That's not admirable at all.
Yeah, so that philosopher we told you about, Mark, Plato, said like this is, the Republic, this is the thought experiment to show like what you really think is moral is if you had the ring of invisibility that would let you get away.
And you're confused. That's Tolkien. Sorry.
Oh shit. Okay. Yeah. If you had the ring of Ganges that's from Middle Earth, then how would you act? Right, like would you still not act in certain ways to be beneficial for you? Because the whole point is to take reward and punishment out of the equation to get down to what we actually think is a moral obligation, not just a pragmatic thing. That that you should do the thing that that will work out best for you. So it's particularly like bizarre and perverse to say that that what makes something moral is that you'll be punished for not doing it. I mean, this is like. I know I can't play it here. We'll get a copyright strike, but there is a. I always think about there's this beautiful early season episode of South Park where they toilet paper their art teacher's house, and then it's Stan, Kyle, and Eric, and one of the other kids, Butters, gets blamed for it, and so Eric is just ecstatic about this. It's like, this is awesome. We're not going to get punished. And Stan and Kyle starts like, yeah, we feel bad. He's like, what do you mean you feel bad? We're not going to get punished. It's like, yeah, we still feel bad. He's like, are you worried you're going to get punished later?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, no, but you don't understand, guys. Somebody else is going to take the blame. It's like, yeah, that makes it worse. It's like, what? Eric, we feel bad for other people, and he just can't comprehend what they're saying. And like later in the episode, there's a thing where he's like, I thought about it, and you guys are right. We could still get punished later. And like this is the Eric Cartman view of morality and guilt.
Yeah. Oh God.
Dostoevsky rightly said, if there is no immortality, then all things are permitted. Given the finality of death, it really does not matter how you live. The state torturers in Soviet prisons understood this all too well. Richard Wurmbrandt reports, the cruelty of atheism is hard to believe when man has no faith in the reward of good or the punishment of evil. There is no reason to be human. There is no restraint from the depths of evil which is in man. The communist torturers often said, there is no God, no hereafter, no punishment for evil. We can do what we wish. I have heard one torturer even say, I thank God in whom I don't believe that I have lived to this hour when I can express all the evil in my heart. He expressed it in...
I just want to pause to say that none of that shit happened. Nobody said that.
Definitely not. Definitely not.
Like, Stalinism is bad, but I don't think that Stalin, that like, I don't think that people, that that the Stalinists were like
Iago.
cartoon villains just announcing how evil they were. Like, I don't think that's how ideology really works.
That's actually the only way you can become a communist. You have to renounce good and proclaim to the world that evil is now my good.
Mm-hmm.
Like Milton Satan.
Are you referring to Iago from Shakespeare or from the Disney cartoon Aladdin?
No, Aladdin.
Okay, thanks.
I'm pretty sure, like all of the historical despotisms you care to talk about, like most of the people who are enforcing them, in fact, had convinced themselves that they were ultimately, doing the right thing. In fact, it'd be really difficult to do those things if you couldn't, convince yourself that somehow or another you were serving the greater good, or there was some transcendent justification for it. So I mean, like it doesn't have that much to do with it. But I just like I mean, William Lane Craig believes a lot of goofy things, but he's way too smart to believe this.
Yeah.
In unbelievable brutality and torture inflicted on prisoners. Given the finality of death, it really doesn't matter how you live. So, what do you say to someone who concludes that we may as well just live as we please out of pure self-interest? You might say it's in your best self-interest to adopt a moral lifestyle. But clearly that's not always true. We all know situations where self-interest runs smack dab in the face of morality. Moreover, if you're sufficiently powerful, like a Ferdinand Marcos or a Papadoc Duvalier or even a Donald Trump, then one can pretty much ignore the dictates of conscience and safely live in self-indulgence. Historian Stuart C. Easton sums it up well when he writes, "There is no objective reason why man should be moral unless morality pays off in his social life or makes him feel good. There is no objective reason why man should do anything save for the pleasure it affords him." To believe, then, that God does not exist and that there is thus no moral accountability would be quite literally demoralizing. For then we'd have to accept that our moral choices are ultimately insignificant, since both our fate and that of the universe will be the same regardless of what we do. By demoralization, I mean a deterioration of moral motivation. It's hard to do the right thing when that means sacrificing your self-interest, or to resist temptation when desire is strong. And the belief that ultimately it doesn't matter what you choose or what you do is apt to sap one's moral strength and so undermine one's moral life. As Robert Adams observes, having to regard it as very likely that the history of the universe will not be good on the whole, no matter what one does, seems apt to induce a cynical sense of futility about the moral life, undermining one's moral resolve and one's interest in moral considerations. The absence of moral accountability from the philosophy of atheism thus makes an ethic of compassion and self-sacrifice a hollow abstraction. In sum, I think it's plausible that without God, there are no objective moral values, moral duties, or moral accountability. God is therefore vitally necessary to morality. Now, as I said, this is a conclusion which is accepted by a great many atheist philosophers, such as Nietzsche, Russell, and Sartre. Though the conclusion is a painful one, these thinkers believe that honesty compels them to face it squarely. The challenge confronting the atheist philosopher, who continues to cling to objective moral values and duties after letting go of God, is, I think, threefold. First, to explain what is the basis for objective moral values on atheism. In particular, what is the basis for the intrinsic value of human beings? Second, to explain what is the source of objective moral duties on atheism. What makes certain acts obligatory or forbidden if there is no moral lawgiver to command or prohibit them? Why is it wrong to harm other members of our species, to inflict harm upon others? Thirdly, to explain how on atheism ultimate moral accountability exists, or alternatively, to explain why it is not necessary to morality. These questions must, I think, be addressed if one is to maintain that God is not necessary to morality.
All right. So there's a lot that you can say here. Just real quick. Nietzsche, okay. I mean, little bit controversial if you get into nitpicky Nietzsche scholarship, but like basically Nietzsche, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Sartre, okay. Similar caveats. Russell,
yeah.
what the hell is
Russell, the Russell, I had this. Where did he get that from? I mean, I'm just curious. So, like, is there? I mean, I'm not a Russell scholar, but there's nothing I can remember in anything I've read of Russell that would suggest that he holds that kind of view.
No, I mean,
and certainly not in like just in who he was. He was also very much an activist. Like he was an anti-war activist, very active, very strident.
Yeah, I mean, Russell, like, unlike those other two people, Russell made explicitly moral arguments all the time. If there's some passage somewhere where Russell suggests that metaethical skepticism is entailed by atheism, I mean, I'm certainly not familiar with it, and I'd be very disappointed because I'm pretty sure that, I mean, I would really think that Russell would just trot out the Euthyphro dilemma. So that's just weird. Also, second thing, he says in that last part, and it's amazing because it's only been like 3 minutes since the last time we stopped, but in those 3 minutes there's the Russell thing, and he also said that moral motivation requires thinking. Like, it was weird because he seemed to be saying moral motivation requires thinking that, like, how much good or bad there is in the world overall, or it was a little unclear whether there are going to be more good outcomes than bad outcomes in the world overall is up to us, which is not at all obvious. But also, presumably, if theism is true, it's actually not up to us as humans whether there are more good outcomes or bad outcomes. You can do all the wickedness you want, God will prevail.
Mm-hmm. Exactly right. I mean, this is with a lot of these issues, God actually complicates that. So, like, for that one, I mean, if you bring God into the picture, then whatever wickedness I'm doing is part of his plan, or at least if you bring in a lot of other very common theological views, anything I'm doing is part of God's plan. And so actually it becomes harder to account for
it seems
particular actions matter.
Yeah, it seems like if you believe in divine providence, you really need to separate your evaluations of moral goodness and badness like which outcomes that you hope to come about, because it's like it's well established God canon that God uses the wicked actions of wicked people in order to bring about his purposes. See, for example, Pharaoh crucifixion, etc.
I am, as Ben mentioned, a meta-ethicist. That's my
say that again.
I'm a meta. I do meta-ethics. That's my specialty, and I do count myself as a sort of moral realist. I do believe there are true moral judgments. I believe that some of them are objectively true, yada, yada. But I only believe that because I also believe that if I behave really good, that I can stave off the heat death of the universe.
As you were speaking, I never know. It's like, as you start that preamble, is Mark going to make a really incisive philosophical point, or is he going to make a joke? Let's see which way this goes.
I mean, but there is something really, like, like try to imagine the person who says like this, that you have that Peter Singer thought experiment about the guy who passes by the child drowning in the lake, and say like that, like, you sort of try to imagine like like even just like, because as a psychological claim, which is what Craig seems to be making, like really try to imagine the person who thinks, well, I would, but heat death of the universe, there's not going to be a good moral outcome regardless, so really there's no reason I should.
It really is sociopath. Like even the question, like, why would it matter to treat people well?
Yeah. Why would it matter if there's no one there to hold me accountable? Why would it
matters to them, to the people that you're treating well?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is sociopathic. It's gross. It's really gross. It's just, and you would have to think he knows better. It's just, I guess he thinks this is good rhetoric, but.
All right. Also, to go back to something earlier in the discussion.
Yes. Shark Thor. Yes.
Wait, show it again. I missed it.
Oh, it's still
it's up. It's up. You see, Shark Thor.
Okay, you've redeemed yourself. That's wonderful. I'm going to incorporate that into my meta ethics. That's like some role.
Yep. So now there's morality for people and sharks.
That's right. Now what the shark does to that other shark is rape, because there's shark 4. That was missing.
Around the world, there are great white sharks feeling their first twinge of guilt.
Oh, God.
Awesome. All right. Any other thoughts before we go back and watch Kagan's response?
Nope. I'm on Shark Thor.
All right. Fair enough.
We'll now have 10 minutes of questioning between Dr. Craig asking Dr. Kagan about his thoughts.
Well, obviously, a number of questions came up in my talk that would be pertinent to what you shared, Shelly. In your opening address, you said right or wrong depends upon the whether you hurt other people without justification. And when asked, are these really wrong? You answered yes. Why? Because it harms the victim. Now, I guess my difficulty is that I certainly agree that it's wrong to harm people, obviously, but it's hard for me to understand on a naturalistic worldview, such as I described, why on the worldview of naturalism, inflicting harm upon other members of our species is really wrong. It seems to me that this happens all the time among other animals. And so why is it wrong peculiarly for human beings to inflict harm on each other?
All right, so let's start with that. Suppose that my 3-year-old nephew walks into your house, takes some book off your shelf, and tears the pages out. He hasn't done anything wrong, or 3-year-old's probably old enough he has done something wrong. Make him a year and a half, he hasn't done anything wrong. If I go into your house, tear some pages out of your book, I've done something wrong. What's the difference? Well, I'm capable of appreciating reasons for respecting your property that my 1.5-year-old, this is hypothetical 1.5-year-old nephew, doesn't have the capacity, right? There are differences between people that allow me and you to think about our behaviors, to evaluate our behaviors, to see whether or not there are legitimate reasons for behaving as we do. Creatures that don't have that capacity don't have that capacity. It's precisely because they lack that capacity that makes no sense that the notion of right and wrong behavior gets no purchase. Lions can't reflect upon their behavior, so when they do it, it's not wrong. If you or I were to engage in that behavior, we can reflect upon that. We can recognize the reasons for not behaving that way. So I think the distinction is a fairly straightforward one, not a deep mystery or a hard challenge for the naturalist to respond to.
Okay, I think that's a good answer.
I did just want to say that I really like this example because when my oldest nephew actually was just about 3, I had this awesome interaction with him. I was staying with my sister and her husband, and I had this like iPod speaker thing that was in the guest room I was staying in, and my nephew, I saw him like leaving the room carrying it. I was like, "You can't have that." He was like, "Why not?" I was like, "Well, it's mine. It's you can't take other people's things." He said, "Well, why not?" And I said, "Well, would you like it if I took something of yours, if I, and he thought about it for a second, and he said, I swear to God, well, it's okay for me to take your things. It's not okay for you to take things."
So your nephew's a sociopath or a liar, basically.
He's gotten better.
Okay.
At not quite 3, that was his that it was kind of funny because he didn't really see the moral issue, but you could see that he was clearly concerned about being inconsistent and came up with an internal consistent standard, which is that
at least it came up with a good moral rule to justify its behavior.
But yes, also very obviously, good response. So
yeah.
Sir, for why we wouldn't regard animals as moral agents who would be culpable for their acts. But it seems to me that at best that answer would go to show that rationality or the ability to reflect rationally on things is a necessary condition for moral behavior, but I don't see that that's a sufficient condition for moral behavior. It's still not clear to me why it would be wrong for creatures who have considerably complex neurological systems to inflict harm on each other on a naturalistic worldview in the struggle for survival.
Okay, so the question you asked initially was, how can I explain why it's wrong for me to murder when it's not wrong for lions to murder? And to answer that question, all it takes is for me to point out a relevant difference between us. And you've just, I think, said, yeah, all right, so I managed to do that. If we now shift to the question, so what does it take for wrongness to enter the world above and beyond rationality? I think the answer might well be, actually, once we achieve a certain level of rationality, nothing more is taken. Nothing more is needed. The reason it's objectively wrong for me to engage in murder is precisely because there is a reason for me not to do it, a reason that I'm capable of recognizing. And if you ask, what more does it take? The answer is, well, those are the basic ingredients right there. We can refine it. I mean, we can put a little icing on it if we'd like to make it. But in terms of the essentials, that's it. What there's reason for me to do depends on what kind of creature I am. Once I become the kind of creature in the evolutionary, process, once creatures evolve that are capable of stepping back from their actions, capable of reflecting about whether or not their behavior makes sense, whether it conforms to standards that they are themselves prepared to endorse, at that point, the machinery is in place. And at that point, there are reasons for me to behave in certain ways and to avoid other kinds of behavior. And if you ask, but what makes that wrong?
I'm still not clear as to why these beings suddenly achieve intrinsic moral worth in virtue of having these complex nervous systems that enables them to have self-reflection and so forth.
If you put it as complex nervous systems, it sounds pretty deflationary.
Right.
What's so special about having a complex nervous system? But of course, that complex nervous system allows you to do calculus. It allows you to do astrophysics. It allows you to write poetry. It allows you to fall in love. Put under that description, you ask, what's so special about humans from a naturalistic perspective? I'm at a loss to know how to answer that question. If you don't see why we'd be special and different from everything else in
Sorry, just that's I'm at a loss to respond to your question is a very good way of responding to these questions.
Yeah, this is rhetorically really great, and it gets to the heart of it. It's like what is wrong with you? You don't see what's special about all this stuff. It's really really
Yeah, I mean, it's mildly frustrating because at least at the stage of the debate, he isn't doing what I keep really wanting him to do, which is to turn around, which is to say, like, okay, and if that's not enough, right?
Mm-hmm.
The fact that we're capable of understanding reasons and all whatever isn't enough for us to be, moral agents.
Mm-hmm.
And how does adding God to the picture?
Yeah. What's the magic he does that turns us into valuable things? Yeah.
It sort of reminds me of, Bernard Williams' one thought too many objection to utilitarianism.
Yeah, and yeah, before you do that, I just did want to say, like, especially because if there's a God, right? I mean, God created the sharks, but we agree that sharks are moral agents.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, okay, maybe sharks created the shark.
Yeah, Shark Story made the sharks.
We just saw a photograph.
Okay, before people became aware of the existence of Shark Thor, the usual.
Let's focus on lions. There's no lion Thor yet until Andrew draws it.
Yeah, so we agree that lions aren't moral agents, even though lions were, ex hypothesi created by God. So how is it that adding to our description of humans that we were created by God, how is that supposed to help explain how it is that we're moral agents? I mean, even if you accept that dualism makes us moral agents, and again, that's like all your work is ahead of you if you want to make that argument. But like, even if we were to accept for the sake of argument that dualism would somehow help us make us moral agents, that's just a separate subject from whether God exists.
Yep.
But I'm sorry. So you were going to bring up the one thought too many argument.
What? So, actually, your point's actually more concise. But whatever. I'm trying to say it, so I'll say it because it's philosophy. It's interesting, and this is what the people are here for. Bernard Williams has objection to utilitarianism called the one thought too many objection. He has you imagine a situation where someone sees two people drowning, and one of these people drowning is his wife. The other person is, I can't remember, a doctor or something. But the person's a utilitarian, so he quickly does a calculus to determine who he should save. And it turns out that his wife is the one. By saving his wife, he's going to cause the best consequences. And he saves her. Williams points out he should not tell his wife how he came to this conclusion about how to act, because there was one thought too many in that process. His wife would rightly be angry that he done a calculus and didn't just think, oh my God, it's my wife. That's all the reason I favor.
Right. I think the intuition might even be sharpened if we remove it from being a dilemma about saving the wife versus saving somebody else. Just say, like, he sees his wife drowning, and before he rushes in to save her, he thinks, hold on, is it morally, like, should I do this? Like, is there going to be more happiness in the world and less suffering if I do? Okay, there is. All right.
Yeah. How many lives could I save with the life insurance money if I donate it to UNICEF? I mean, I don't know. And
so too, if William Lane Craig jumps into a river to save you from drowning, you can be grateful, but you might be offended and bothered that he only did so because of his recognition that behavior, that duty, if you will, was dictated by a cosmic being. It's one thought too many.
Yeah, right. Yeah, fair enough. Which by the way also goes to, you can equally always thought you could equally do that for Kantianism, right? That it's the same. It's the same objection that we want people like we seem to want people to be morally motivated in a more direct and visceral way than that. If you pause to work out whether the categorical imperative entails that you should save your wife, that seems to be disturbing in very much the same way.
Right. Contractarianism too, like really any worked out moral theory is going to have to say something about that, right?
Yeah. which is not, whatever. It's not necessarily a knocked out objection or whatever, but it is a like that is something that's a problem with a lot of moral theories, that they seem to have. Either they seem to really separate the moral theory from the account of moral motivation, or they end up with these kind of perverse accounts of moral motivations.
Yeah, there's a kind of anti-foundationalist argument there, right?
Yeah. All right.
In creation, that because we can do poetry, we can write a novel, we can think philosophical thoughts, we can do calculus, and we can think about the morality of our behavior, I don't know what kind of answer could possibly satisfy you at that point.
Well, obviously, the kind of answer that I offered, but
but can I ask just to follow up on that? Because I'm tempted to say I could play this game, and that's unfair, because of course it's not a game, but I could pose the same kinds of questions to you. Perhaps I will, in 10 minutes. I could say, look, all right, so God says, you guys are really, really special.
right.
How does his saying it make us really special? But you see, he gave us a soul. How does our having a soul make us special? Whatever answer you give, you could always say, with regard to that, what's so special about that? At a certain point, you're just going to have to say, you know what? These features really do seem to me to be special. Insofar as it seems to me that our ability to communicate, to reflect, to love, to be creative, and consequently to shape our behavior with an eye towards how we're interacting with one another, these things strike me as remarkable ways in which we're special.
I think that they strike all of us that way, and that's the difficulty, perhaps, I think, in showing what I'm attempting to show, is that we all do, I think, intuitively value one another. We value persons. We value poetry, creativity, and all of these things. I think we all agree that these are goods. The question is, though, on a naturalistic view, why think that these things are goods? It seems to me that you emphasize in your own book, On the Limits of Morality, the importance of having explanations and not cutting off the search for explanations too soon. And I wonder if you're not cutting off the search for explanations too soon by simply saying, well, I'm just going to regard persons as intrinsically valuable, but without any kind of further grounding for that.
But of course, I haven't claimed there is no further grounding for that. I gave you a sketch of the contractarian thought. Your attitude was, I don't find that a very compelling story. It doesn't seem to me to be the kind of thing that constitutes an adequate grounding. I suppose these things are in the eyes of the beholder, and everybody here is entitled to decide for themselves what kind of answers will be satisfactory or not.
Let me ask you a different question.
One more.
Oh, okay. Are you a determinist?
Yes.
And yet you still think that love is significant and human choices are morally significant, even though they're determined?
So to give a piece of jargon to the audience that Bill will be familiar with, I'm a compatibilist.
I do want to just cut in here and say that the love example is particularly strange because whereas Kagan is about to advocate the compatibilism, or if you're not familiar with that terminology, what we can shorthand as the correct position on determinism. Like whatever you think about that, it's like pretty weird to think that, like, okay, even if you think that moral responsibility requires a determinism, and there's a thriving philosophical debate about that, it's deeply weird to think that like love being important requires indeterminism.
Yeah, I mean that's the kind of thing. I've heard people say things like that before. Usually like very religious Craig type people say that kind of thing before. But like with the responsibility debate, I can get where the hard determinist or the libertarian, any incompatibilist, I can get where they're coming from on that. I think there's some force to some of their arguments. I don't get where, like, it doesn't matter what the root of love is. If it comes from God, if there's some evolutionary story, anyone who experiences love understands the specialness of love. Like, I can't begin to understand why anyone would think that, oh, well, if you're a materialist or determinist or whatever, that's going to make love pointless or not special or not valuable. It's
yeah. Yeah, and I do want to just shout out here, Dirk Paraboom has a video you can find on YouTube that I've shown classes before called "The Illusion of Free Will." So he is as well as Ryan knows. I mean, Mark didn't even know who Plato was, but or
more importantly, doesn't even know who Samantha is.
Paraboom is a hard. Well, he's since modified his position a little bit, but basically, at least in this video, certainly, he's a hardcore skeptic about free will of any kind. But he has, which is a position I disagree with. I think he makes an interesting argument for it. But he has, at the end, he talks about this example, and I think he makes a pretty compelling case that, as you say, like if we're talking about whether moral responsibility requires us not to be determined, I think there are intuitions on both sides, and it's a complicated debate. But just like in raw, ordinary, intuitive terms, I don't think we, like Paraboom points out, when you think about romantic love, we talk about falling in love, even sort of natural metaphors we use.
Like it had to be you. Like that's a natural metaphor. Like that's a romantic song. Like it had to be you. Like that. I'm not gonna sing it. Sorry, Mark can sing better. But yeah. But, it's actually a romantic idea that I couldn't help but fall in love with you. That I was determined to fall in love with you.
Yeah, right. We tell ourselves these stories about how it's fate that you're with the person you love, because that seems more romantic than believing that you have free choice in the matter. And certainly, like when you talk about like parents like feeling love towards young children and things like that, I mean, that there's certainly no, I think you would worry about anybody who felt like they had a choice in the matter.
That's right. That's right. And the parents example is a good one too, because I think if you ask the average layperson on the street, like, they would agree that there's some biological story for why they love their kids. Everyone already accepts that, right? That in nature, there's a reason why parents love their kids, and you're determined to love your kids. And no one feels like, oh, well, if there's some natural story for why that happens, the love for my kids doesn't matter. That it's just a bizarre inference.
Worth pointing out two things. One, Kagan's doing a really good job here. He's relaxed and conversational and not confrontational. He's kind of very quickly dealing with these questions in a way that isn't dismissive or how any one of us would deal with these questions.
Yeah.
Which I think is like, what do you mean, you asshole?
What's wrong with you sociopath?
Yeah, no, he does a very good job of not being given here.
Yeah.
Also, from this this shot's nice. His sartorial game is strong.
Yeah.
Right? That's a good look.
Yeah.
Yes. All right.
That is to say, I believe that one can combine determinism and free will. So absent free will, humans would lack the significance that we clearly have. But I believe that's compatible with determinism. Actually, am I a determinist? Who knows what quantum mechanics teaches us about whether or not determinism is true. But at least I believe that determinism could be true without in any way threatening my conviction that humans are special.
Did you have a follow-up on that one?
Well,
I think you did.
Only to say that it just seems to me to rob moral choices of any sort of significance if we're determined to do it by the antecedent physical causes that lead up to the point of choosing, and then cause our brains to react one way rather than another. I can't see how that could have any more moral significance than a tree growing a branch at a certain point in its development.
Because you're an incompatibilist. You don't believe determinism and free will. So this is a debate for another night. I mean, it's not that I think the truth of compatibilism is at all self-evident.
Can you just explain what that term means?
Compatibilism is the view that there's no logical inconsistency between belief in determinism on the one hand and the existence of free will on the other. They're compatible.
Well,
That's
a little bit misleading, though. I mean, you need to explain what you mean by free will in that case, if everything's determined.
What I was trying to do is simply give a quick definition. I said that this is a very, as you know, it's a very, very complicated question. We would basically hijack the entire rest of the evening to start trying to...
I'm unclear on the terms myself.
Right. So my thought was just that the plausibility of the compatibilist view that I hold, I don't take to be self-evident. I believe it takes philosophical argumentation for it. I completely agree that those drawn to incompatibilism, those drawn to the view that you can't have both deterministic physical laws and robust free will think if naturalism is true and the best science teaches us that determinism is true, itself a controversial question whether that's the best interpretation of our best science, then we'll lack free will. And then if free will is necessary for having special value, then we'll lack special value. But there's a lot of premises before we get to the conclusion that naturalism doesn't have space for this special value. And I reject several of those premises, which is why I'm not feeling uncomfortable by the challenge that Bill's raising.
Well, let's turn the table, and now you'll ask Bill some questions.
All right. So one of the things that you said in your opening remarks, you quoted several people. I think there was a long quote from Michael Roos saying something like, if naturalism is true.
I will say that whereas Mark is absolutely right about Kagan's demeanor and how well he's doing here, and yes, as somebody said in the chat, you can tell which is the dad and which is the uncle, in terms of their affect. But some guy could Chapo energy to that comment. I like. But I will say that I think that I understand his impulse because obviously, he wants to stick with the broader picture here and not get sucked into the details and make a bigger point. But I do think that I do think that maybe he missed a little bit of a beat here. I think that Kagan, I think that he could have given a sentence or two to sort of explain a little bit, what he means by free will. I think just a strategic use of the word phrase like acting on reasons could go a long way here.
That's right. Yeah, he could have. Yeah, I completely agree. He could have just said a little bit there, and he also could have just said a little bit. What's that?
Sorry. Especially since he's set up much groundwork on reasons talk.
Yeah,
it would be really easy to just shoehorn that in.
Exactly. Yeah, and also he could have just said a little bit about why the free will question is also just very set, like we were just for the reasons we just explained, is very separate from the questions of value. That things like love don't hinge on questions of free will.
Yeah. No. Exactly. And yeah, as Mark says, all the reasons talk earlier. I mean, I think just saying yeah. Look. Obviously, I don't mean free from deterministic physical laws, but I think that the kind of freedom that that matters here is involves the ability to be moved by reasons and to act on them and to weigh them against each other. I think that would have given people at least a quick and dirty.
Yeah, at least just a taste. So especially for this audience, so they just understand what the hell this view is supposed to be.
Yeah, because I think this is something there's way too much danger with. I think on a sort of in an academic conference sort of setting, I think what he's doing here is exactly right. But I think in this case, there's way too much danger that with this audience, they'll just think, okay, well, he's making this nonsensical claim that you can have freedom and determinism, and what does that even mean? And he's not telling us, and just kind of dismiss it outright.
It's true. If theism is false, then ethics is illusory. Deeper meaning is illusory. That's not an exact quote, but I think those phrases were there. And I found that an interesting slide, or so it seemed to me. The move from ethics is illusory to deeper meaning is illusory. I think I want to concede that in the way you mean deeper meaning, I don't believe in deeper meaning. Because I think when you talk that way, you think for there to, not that I have any trouble talking about meaning or even deep meaning, but when you talk that way, I think you're thinking it's got to be meaning on a cosmic scale. That's where some of the points about accountability come in as well.
Yes.
So, fine, I believe that humans are just creatures that evolved on this tiny little speck of dust. But I don't see how the denial of deeper meaning should give me any reason to think, therefore I'm committed to ethics as illusory. So perhaps you could explain that.
Where that came in, I think, was with respect to moral accountability. And this, yes, and also with regard to the significance of human beings. It seemed to me that on a naturalistic worldview, everything is ultimately destined to destruction in the heat death of the universe. As the universe expands, it grows colder and colder as its energy is used up. And eventually all the stars will burn out. All matter will collapse into dead stars and black holes. There will be no life, no heat, no light, only the corpses of dead stars and galaxies expanding into endless darkness. And in light of that end, it's hard for me to understand how our moral choices have any sort of
like a stoner metal
There's
song.
no moral accountability. The universe is neither better nor worse for what we do. That ultimately there isn't. Our moral lives become vacuous because they don't have that kind of cosmic significance.
I still need to have you explain that for me better, because again, it seems to me it's one thing to say it lacks eternal, cosmic, everlasting significance. Mm-hmm. It's another thing to say it lacks significance. In fact, to give one of your examples, you talked about, again, I don't remember the source of this quote, but the torturers, was it Nazi torturers?
Right, yeah.
And you say, if theism isn't true, then it doesn't really matter. This strikes me as, I'm sorry, I'm sure it's going to sound rude, but it strikes me as an outrageous thing to suggest it doesn't really matter. Surely it matters to the torture victims whether they're being tortured. It doesn't require that this makes some cosmic difference to the eternal significance of the universe for it to matter whether a human being is tortured. It matters to them. It matters to their family. It matters to us. So again, how do you move from the lack of eternal significance to the thought that if it doesn't have eternal significance, it can't have any significance?
Because the victim, it obviously matters to him in the sense that he's in pain and agony. But ultimately, it doesn't matter that he was ever in pain and in agony. The whole thing just degenerates into utter...
So this is really worth highlighting. Kagan asks Craig, how do you get from no ultimate significance to torture to no significance? And Craig answers, well, sure, it matters to the victim, but there's no ultimate significance.
Yeah. Which is just, when you're at the point where you're saying it doesn't really matter if Nazis torture people, I think you've lost the debate. I think that's it.
Yeah. Look like
it only matters to torture people if... and I don't even quite know how he ends that sentence. I mean, something about God, but I mean...
If somehow there's something after the heat death of the universe, that's the only way it matters if the Nazis tortured people.
Which is funny, because I have to say, intuitively, if anything, that would be the other way around.
Exactly. Yeah.
If this life is only the tiniest, most, infinitesimal fragment of our eternal lives... then sure, there is some sense in which what happens to you doesn't matter very much. That that's well, why fixate on what happened to you for a couple of years in Triplicka, when you're going to live forever in heaven.
Yeah, that's right. That sucks that for this 2 years, but you get infinity of paradise after that. So exactly, I would seem to diminish the significance of it. Whereas, I'm sure I'm saying exactly what you're about to say. But yeah, if this is it, if this is all we get, then it's much, much worse. It's much more significant that the Nazis did these horrible things to these people.
Yeah, exactly. Also, I'm afraid that we're going to have to shift one of our examples again. So.
Oh no. Uh-oh.
So.
Oh, well, there's okay. No more lion examples.
Pretty good. So is J. Andrew World AI or something? Do you just...
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yep.
Is it a neural net that you say combine deity with animal and
yeah,
it happens.
cool.
yeah. Yeah, it's a cool thing. You just type in the words and you get it.
Yeah. I will be very happy if he actually does the three of us as Hooting Gibbons, but yeah. So anyway, this is just really worth like underlining and circling a couple times that the question was, why does ultimate significance, like no ultimate significance, mean isn't morally significant in any way? And the answer was because then there wouldn't be ultimate significance.
Yeah.
Meaninglessness and insignificance. I don't mean to suggest that the torture didn't do a bad thing to this person, but ultimately it doesn't matter. It all ends up the same.
Yes, but it all ending up the same isn't the same thing as, and so it doesn't matter what happens until we get there. And when I say, and it matters what the path is before we get to the end point, I don't merely mean subjectively it matters, it appears to matter, it matters to them, but it doesn't really matter.
Well, and that's what it seems to me. It just matters subjectively.
But again, I just want to say, I don't understand how we get from, if it doesn't objectively matter to the universe, or doesn't objectively matter on a cosmic scale, how do we get from that to, so it doesn't objectively matter at all?
Well, remember,
it matters.
It's not a point about the nature of objective.
It matters in the only way anything could matter. Nothing is added.
Yeah. I mean, if anything, Kagan is accepted for the sake of argument that there is some extra sense in which it matters, given that God exists, given that the death of the universe isn't the end of human, whatever. Like, and I understand what he's doing. It's like a very good like I really like this move, but also he could make the extra move here of saying, but also what's this extra layer of moral significance any of this is supposed to impart? How does that work? Spell it out for me.
Yeah.
It's the question is, why should we think objective value must be on the cosmic scale or not there at all?
Now let's remember the argument. This concern arose in the third point about moral accountability. This wasn't in the first 2 points about objective moral values and duties. What I said was, with regard to the third point, even if objective moral values and duties exist, they become irrelevant because they're inconsequential. So my third point about moral accountability was simply to say, on atheism, even if there are objective right and wrong and good and evil, there's no moral accountability, and so one might as well just live as he pleases. And
might as well. If by might as well means there's no reason to live one way versus the other unless it makes a difference on the cosmic scale, it just seems to me that the same questions being, to my ears, begged yet again. It matters perfectly. There's an objective, categorical reason, not a matter of opinion. There's a fact of the matter about the compelling, overriding reason that you are irrational to disregard, even though, in terms of the heat death of the universe, it won't stop it. But for all that, there's an objective reason not to behave this way.
That would be to say you have an objective moral duty. And for the third point, I was willing to grant that. But the question here is the deeper question about why adopt the moral point of view. And that can't be a moral answer because you're asking the question, why adopt the moral point of view? I think the concern that I have in this third point is that on
What's the answer that you believe you got to give us?
Let me explain. I think on the third point that what I'm trying to say there is that on atheism or naturalism, theism, that prudential value and moral value are on a collision course with each other. That what it's prudent for me to do is often in contrast or in conflict with what's moral for me to do. And prudence would seem to trump morality in terms of one's self-interest in virtue of the fact that it makes no difference how you choose. But on theism, where there is moral accountability, you can consistently make choices that go against your self-interest and sacrifice self-interest and prudence for the sake of the moral value and moral duty.
Because precisely you'll get it back in the end. And so it's not really, in the long term, a self-sacrifice at all. That's the thought, yes?
Well, that wasn't what that wouldn't be the way I'd put it. It's not that.
But that is the reason that you think you can resolve the conflict between prudence and and morality, because God makes it be the case that unless you act morally, your self-interest won't actually be furthered. That's how the solution is.
Yes, that's right. That they'll be in harmony with each other ultimately.
So you're completely right. I don't believe they're in harmony.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean I believe the only rational thing to do is to act prudently. On the contrary, I believe there's greater reason. This should be a form of a question. It's like Jeopardy. Put this in a form of question, Shelly. Yeah. why not believe that moral reasons outweigh prudential reasons? The mere fact that there's a conflict doesn't commit the naturalist to the claim that the prudential ones are the weightier ones.
All right, but there is that conflict, and for many people, I think, as I said, this can have a demoralizing effect upon a person because ultimately his moral choices make no difference either for himself or for the good of the universe. And I suspect that this will be demoralizing in the way that Adams suggested it would.
No doubt for some people it will be, but of course for some people there's a different kind of demoralizing that takes place with the belief in theism, isn't there? I mean, if we're just going to talk about what are some possible psychological effects, some people will act morally not out of the recognition of the objective values, but merely in hopes of getting into heaven and avoiding hell. There's something morally off about that as well. And
I agree.
So both sides face certain empirical questions about, certain people may misread the implications of the view. That strikes me as a standoff at best.
I don't know. I'm not sure that the person who acts in self-interest has misread the implications of the atheistic worldview.
That's because you've yet again assumed that if we're naturalists, we must assume that prudence, either there are no moral reasons at all, or if there are, they're inferior in strength to prudential reasons. That doesn't seem to be to follow from naturalism at all. If we had more time, obviously we can only begin to scratch the surface of this debate. If we had more time, I'd lay upon you my elaborate theory of the nature of practical reasoning, according to which prudential reasons are less significant than moral reasons. Well, this is a view that I think is completely compatible with naturalism. Little imaginary dictator, I suppose, has acted wrongly and as such deserves punishment. So how can we justify the punishment? In terms of the rules of the social contract, significant than moral reasons. Well, this is a view that I think is completely compatible with naturalism. Little imaginary dictator, I
So does it just skip right there?
Yeah, it does. I wasn't sure at first, which is why I went back in case something weird happened. But it's clearly, the video clearly skips a minute for some reason. I have no idea why. But in any case, I hope during the skip minute he said, but I understand that you have to take my word for it. So once again, remember that even if you think, that I don't have such a compelling answer, that by itself is no argument for thinking that prudential reasons outweigh moral reasons given naturalism.
That's right. That's right.
I suppose, has acted wrongly and as such deserves punishment. So how can we justify the punishment? In terms of the rules of the social contract. What do we do? We agree in the contract that if people break the contract, they'll be subject to penalty.
What if he doesn't want to sign the contract?
So No.
He's outside the contract, so he's not bound by it.
Well, the question is not what does any given person in fact agree to. That's why I talked about what we would agree to insofar as we're imagining ourselves as being perfectly rational. As a perfectly rational being, that is to say, if you imagined a kind of souped up, cleaned up version of the dictator, it would be just as reasonable for him to sign the contract as for the rest of us. It's neither here nor there that he doesn't accept morality. He's still bound by it. We're all bound by it precisely because it would be reasonable for all of us to agree to its terms.
Dr. Kagan, you say that human reason leads to morality.
Dr. Craig.
Dr. Craig, sorry. Wrong pile. Okay, I got myself confused.
Did we skip into audience questions?
Dr. Craig, do you think that without God, there is no free will?
Yes, I guess I would say that, because it would seem to me that if God doesn't exist, then human beings are just material objects, and that what we call free choices are just the results of electrochemical reactions in our nervous system.
It's worth calling attention to how strange this claim is, that because I can understand saying, I mean, look, as Craig himself has, that has said, and is better known for saying that, oh well, nothing could exist, electrochemical reactions or anything else, if there wasn't a cosmic first cause.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, we could argue about whether that's a good, whether that is right or not. But I'd at least understand the position. But here he seems to be saying, well, if there was no God, electrochemical reactions could still exist, but not, I don't know, non-physical minds, something like that. And it's just not at all obvious what the connection is supposed to be there.
Yeah, it's very strange. Yeah, so there's no reason you would think that. There's no argument for that. And also, just, I mean, he seems to be just smuggling in determinism again. I mean, again, we've talked about this already. There are plenty of people who don't believe in God and who are just materialists and who reject determinism and believe in libertarian free will. So I mean, you can.
Yeah, right. That's all like. Yeah, I mean that's all obviously consistent. And again, there's no. How is it exactly? Like, I know we talk that way, pretty philosophically. God gave people free will, things like that. Mm-hmm. And of course, again, if you think theism is true, God gave you whatever you have, right? So there's a straightforward sense in which that would be true. If we have free will and God exists, God gave it to you. But like, what's the connection supposed to be, right? Like, if you have. If you spell out the way things are such that there is no free will, then, add God, how does that mean that there is free will?
Yeah, exactly.
And that therefore they're not genuinely free. So that was why I said one of the implications of naturalism is physicalism, and as a result, determinism. And this seems to me to be just a clear reason for thinking that our moral choices are ultimately illusory and insignificant, because they're like having a toothache or like having hair grow. There is no sense in which a personal agent freely chooses between A and not A and making a moral decision. So I guess I would say that.
I just also want to. I think
it seems like there are.
We can pause there. I think it's also just worth highlighting. I think we've kind of mentioned this before, but you look at any of the free will skeptics. So look at Dirk Perlbaum, look at Bruce Waller, Greg Caruso, a lot of other people, a lot of the prominent skeptics. None of them accept what he just said. They all agree that moral responsibility does not exist, but none of them would make the inference free will does not exist. Therefore, morality doesn't exist. Therefore, moral significance does not exist. They still all agree that there's a difference between morally good actions and morally bad actions. Things can still be morally important. We can still, even on their view, have moral discussions and try and figure out what sorts of things we should do It's just that no one can be deeply blamed or praised for failing or succeeding to do the right thing.
More importantly, I believe that's Sam Harris's view.
Yeah.
Once again, you start. More importantly, I'm like, is Mark going to say something real?
I'm sorry it's such a blatant appeal to authority there, but
Yeah.
Well, Sam Harris actually, if you look at read his view on free will, he says free will doesn't exist. But unlike the rest of those people, he says, but moral responsibility does. You start to read that, you think, oh, weird. Does Sam Harris have some like really unusual combination of views? Nope. He just doesn't know what people, since he hasn't read any of this stuff.
He doesn't need to.
Mean by moral responsibility. So what he reads by moral responsibility is punishment being justified in any way, even a purely consequentialist one, which
That's
of
right.
course all of those people would agree with him. Yes, not free.
Yeah.
Can we just do one of these where we just hoot at Sam Harris for like 4 hours?
I mean, we need, I mean, that should be our usual format, is just play something Sam Harris is saying and hoot at him.
Yeah, well, we will actually, we have talked about this before, just doing like a regular Monday episode where we just do the Sam Harris is wrong about everything episode. I'm still open to doing that.
I'm open to it. It'd be pain. It would involve listening to a lot of Sam Harris, but it would be also doing a service to the world.
Speaking of nice voices, soothing, dulcet tones.
He does have a nice radio voice. Yeah. Maybe almost as good as mine, almost. But I've got to work on it. I've got to emulate Sam a little better. See, he's got that very like. Now everything's very calm, like just very, Got to be more chill. You got to speak very slowly to be Sam Harris.
A lot of people are hung up on the Nazis.
Yeah. They're bad. They're objectively bad. Let's be clear about that.
But it's hard for them to, it seems like, just based on the questions, it's hard for people to understand how we can objectively say they're bad when, if they won, would they still be bad? If they were the ones kind of running the world and dictating morality, would they still be objectively bad in your view?
Yes, the suggestion is not that it's a matter of a popularity poll or who wins the Second World War or which way history goes. It's a thought experiment. The social contract is a thought experiment, and you ask yourself, what are reasonable terms to govern our behaviors with one another? And in trying to set up that thought experiment, you want to set certain background conditions. One background condition I mentioned was the veil of ignorance. You want to make sure you don't know whether you're one of the people who are, in fact, the winners in society or the losers in society. One of the conditions is you want to imagine the bargainers are rational because you don't want the rules that emerge to be an artifact of some mistake in reasoning. It's neither here nor there what the Nazis thought was acceptable. The question is just what, in fact, would be the terms of a contract agreed upon by perfectly rational bargainers. And the terms of those contracts, I think if we had more time, we could proceed to lay out the argument, are such that there'd be a prohibition against killing innocent people, which, of course, is exactly what the Nazis did. So what the Nazis did was violate the terms of the contract. And so, in fact, they were immoral whether or not they see it.
Dr. Craig, there seems to be an issue with this idea of objective good, that there have been numerous crimes in the history of humanity perpetrated on, in the name of religion.
Right.
Right. How do you grapple with that issue?
I'd like to use religious examples of atrocities to help communicate to students the difference between objective good and objective evil. If you say that there is no objective moral value or moral duties, then you have to say things like this, that the Spanish Inquisition, which sent thousands of Jews to their deaths, was really morally indifferent, that the Crusades which enlisted children to send off to war and then were ultimately sold into slavery, was a morally indifferent act. That religious intolerance is morally fine. So I think that these examples help to underscore the fact that there really are objective moral values and duties that we recognize when we think about these kinds of situations. So remember, the argument isn't that you have to believe in God in order to be moral. That's not the argument. The argument is that you need to have God as an objective, transcendent standard for moral value that moves beyond simple human conventions or societal mores.
This wouldn't have been like tactically a good move for Kagan to point out, so I'm glad he didn't, but this is a really dumb audience. The questions so far seem to establish that the audience didn't understand anything anyone said in this debate.
Yeah.
So, Kagan, you think that morality is just a matter of opinion, and whatever people think is morally right is morally right. Well, Craig, don't religious people also do bad things like this? Whatever. Makes me think about the audience here. This audience sucks.
Yeah, I mean, they're not doing, to be fair, they're not doing too much worse than Craig did at actually responding to the substance of what Kagan said.
But why do we stray so much? Why do these things happen so often in the name of God?
Right. If you would ask me that as a Christian philosopher, I would begin to talk about Christian doctrine of sin, that we're morally fallen persons, that we're corrupted, and therefore in desperate need of God's moral cleansing and forgiveness and rehabilitation in our lives. And that these moral issues bring to the fore our desperate need of God as a moral healer and forgiver.
And Dr. Kagan, why do we violate the social contract so much, whether it's on Wall Street or whether it's in Nazi Germany?
I would talk about sin as well. I mean, the vocabulary of sin, though it finds its natural home in religion, isn't limited. I mean, we need a vocabulary to talk about. We need to face the fact that people are not perfectly moral. And it's no doubt some deep truth about our nature that we fail to live up to our moral obligations. You can put this fact in some metaphysical terms in terms of original sin. You can put this fact in naturalistic terms in terms of something about our evolutionary heritage and how we were evolved to favor our kin and our friends. There's going to be some explanation of it. Anybody who pretends that everything is well with the world is naive. The claim that there's objective morality is not, and that perfectly rational beings would agree to its terms and thereby ground or be from the basis of objective reality, is not any kind of claim that we are perfectly rational, that we behave perfectly rationally. In trivial terms, this is a completely familiar fact. You're on a diet, and the piece of chocolate cake calls you from the refrigerator, right? So you shouldn't do it. You do it anyway. That's what people are like. Interesting question why that's so, but I take it there's no disagreement at all that it's so. And the naturalist, I think, is no more at a handicap in terms of offering explanations of that fact.
What about ways of preventing it? Do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, are there ways of controlling it, sort of instilling the social contract a little bit better?
Well, look, there are a variety of things that people need in order to become moral beings. One is moral education, a topic of tremendous significance, though, again, other than just gesturing its direction, it would take us way too long to say anything helpful about it. How children are brought up so as to have a regard for one another and to recognize that it isn't just a matter of whether you get caught. It isn't just a matter of whether you're going to get punished, but that this is another human being you're dealing with, and as such, you have to have respect for their interests. Moral education is crucially important. Moral community is crucially important. And not to be naive at all, the state is crucially important. I mean, there's certainly one thing that Craig's theism provides him that I lack. He has a cosmic enforcer. which provides a kind of motivation that I can't appeal to. So I've got to hope I can assemble materials here on earth. Although I can't resist taking one little, I'm not sure it's a pot shot, but at least it's a question about the accountability, which I take it as the thought that evildoers get punished and good doers get a heavenly reward, and so you don't get the bad guys getting into heaven. I'm not quite sure how to reconcile that with the belief that Jesus can provide, salvation. Yeah. It seems to me that is in tension with the notion of accountability we're trying to put forward.
Yeah, actually, this gets into really important questions of theology, because on the Christian view, it isn't the bad guys that go to hell. The bad guys get into heaven. The bad guys are the ones who recognize their sin, who turn to God in contrition and repentance and say, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. It's the self-righteous Pharisees who wind up in hell because they fancy they're so good they don't need God's forgiveness and cleansing. So on the Christian view, Christ actually is the one who bears the penalty and the payment for sin. The wrath of God from God's holy justice is poured out upon Christ so that I don't have to pay the penalty for my sins that I deserve, and I can be a beneficiary of his grace.
But that does seem then in tension with the notion of accountability that you were laying forward, where the thought was, unless my doing good has cosmic significance, if it turns out that I can do evil, and as long as I manage to recognize the saving power of Jesus, in time, this accountability stuff's not really there.
Well, I mean, no genuine Christian would think like that. What I was trying to communicate there.
Awesome.
He makes quite a bit about the fact that only if we believe in God can we show how prudential reasons and moral reasons ultimately align. And it does, whether any true Christian would speak this way or not, it doesn't really, it's beside the point.
Yeah.
He's showing us that even in his theology, moral reasons and prudential reasons don't always align.
Don't always align at all, yeah. To go back to the Nazi example, Hitler could just repent on the last day. Maybe he did right before he shot himself, and he gets into heaven, right? And so then there was no prudential reason for him to not have done all the things he did.
Right. You can, right, like theism is maybe a necessary condition for a view that prudential and moral reasons, completely align. But it's not only is it not a sufficient one, but what's really being brought out here is that, yes, certainly in Christian terms, thinking that prudential moral reasons completely align would be deeply heretical. There's all this theology about how it's
not by deeds alone.
Yeah, well, and it's completely up to so there's the faith alone tradition. There's the tradition that that comes out in Calvinist thought that's really. But Luther says stuff like this too. That's really all about putting heavy emphasis on the idea that it's completely up to the sovereignty of God. It's up to God who gets saved and who doesn't. So you'd be any of the options, right? Faith alone, faith and works. It's just sort of up to the mysterious operations of God, divine providence, who gets saved, who doesn't. Any of the standard Christian options make it not the case that prudential reasons and moral reasons completely line up, because people aren't actually being rewarded for their moral good actions and punished for their moral bad actions. This is this is the sort of the classic evangelical youth group kind of sermon thing. Good people don't go to heaven, saved people go to heaven.
The whole accountability thing is a weird move for him to make anyways, because the debate is about whether or not we can have morality without God. And so Craig starts by sort of trying to define some of the terms or some of our intuitions maybe about what you might need for morality to exist. And he starts off with objectivity, which is I guess, debatable, but I think a reasonable thing to say about common sense intuitions about morality. If morality is not objective, it's not really morality. It says this thing about duties existing, and that seems right to me. If there are no duties, then morality doesn't exist. But this accountability thing, I don't think that very many people at all think that you need ultimate accountability for morality to be real. I think that actually that stops happening somewhere around the age of like 7.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah, I mean, like moral psychologists would say, like this is a key stage of moral development that a child at some point should get beyond grounding their sense of morality in how they're going to be held accountable. If they don't get beyond that stage, that's a sign of you're going the sociopath or some other developmentally stunted child.
Yeah, right. That they have we don't think that that's really moral motivation.
Yeah.
If your motivation is ultimately self-interested, and it is really like just hammer on this point about the disconnect between his claim about moral and prudential reasons and his actual theological beliefs. Like there's this weird point a minute ago where he said, well, seemed to be saying that somehow the accountability is provided by belief that something about how Jesus is taking on the accountability for your sins. But okay, fair enough. But that can't be a claim about moral motivation, because is the person who isn't at all motivated by moral reasons, like any other moral reasons, going to like be motivated by like sympathy for the suffering of Christ? Is that the idea?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what it's supposed to be, honestly.
Yeah. And I see a question in chat about it was directed at Mark about what he meant by objectivity in that case. I'm not sure what case the person in chat was talking about.
Yeah. So I can say a couple of things about objectivity. I mean, it's really just piggybacking on what both Craig and Kagan have said already, that for morality to be objective, it would have to be the case that moral truths are not contingent upon the opinions or inclinations of any one particular person or group of people.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And again, that seems like just to reinforce the whole point of the entire exercise, that if what you mean is if what we care about in moral objectivity is that it's that morality is not going to be contingent on the preferences that exist in any mind, then adding theism into the mix is just not going to help.
Mm-hmm.
I'll vamp a little bit here. I just do philosophy. The topic of objectivity is one of a lot. Objectivity not just in morality, but epistemic objectivity, aesthetic objectivity, so on and so forth. There's a lot of philosophy about what that might amount to. But think about, another field. In math, we think mathematics is objective, largely because even if you don't believe that 2 + 2 = 4, it's still the case that 2 + 2 = 4. Even if no one believed that 2 + 2 = 4, it'd be the case. And in fact, the practice of mathematics is predicated on an objective conception of mathematical truths, because when we try to decide whether or not, say, Fermat's theorem is true, we don't go and do a survey of mathematicians. We have to do the math, right? Because there's a truth out there waiting to be discovered.
Right.
Contrast that with something like objectivity and aesthetics. Mm-hmm. There's a question there, is Led Zeppelin better than the Beatles?
Yes.
Ben and Ryan will nod their heads, but then there's this further question of like, well, but wait, is that an objective truth?
Yes.
Or is that just a way for Ben and Ryan to just reassert their convictions or their own particular inclinations about that music.
No, it's that God and that God enjoys Led Zeppelin more than he enjoys the
Yeah.
Liking Led Zeppelin staves off the heat death of the universe.
Yeah.
If God had happened to enjoy the Beatles more than Zeppelin, there'd be a different story. But we know God enjoys Zeppelin more than Beatles, so it's an objective fact that Zeppelin is better.
Look, the only Marvel movie about a god was Thor, and there's a lot of Zeppelin in the soundtrack. So, I think that settles that question.
Yep,
That's a good argument.
yeah, yeah. Boom. No Beatles in any of the Thor movies, as far as I can recall.
Yeah.
Lots of Zeppelin in the last Thor movie. So,
as much as I hate to praise, Bill Maher, who I think is a kind of a stupid piece of shit and not very funny usually, but he does have good lines every once in a while. And I remember he had a good riff about the Avengers movies, about how strange it was that you had a whole team of superheroes when one of them was literally a god. Not pick up basketball team and one of the players is Thor, but they're all other players.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. No, so I think, and again, like I think that's the right way to make the point here is there is like a real and difficult philosophical question about in what senses values can be objective. Whether we're talking about aesthetic values or moral values, and obviously the answers to those two questions might be completely different. There might be a sense in which morality is objective and aesthetics is not. But those are like real and interesting and deep philosophical questions. But again, say like adding theism to whatever your answer isn't going to help.
No, I saw Oliver posted a Euthyphro problem for Zeppelin. In the chat.
Oh,
do you want to highlight that?
Yeah. So, does God enjoy Zeppelin because they're good, or are they good because God enjoys them? God enjoys them because they're good. No further questions.
Yeah, I don't know. Now I'm confused because I was just trying to ground Zeppelin's goodness in God, but that dilemma is really troubling. I don't know what to think now.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Although, actually, I would just say to Mark's point that that this is something like whenever in classes I've taught David Hume's essay, "The Standard of Taste." Like one way that I've tried to motivate it, for the students is that if you're thinking about this at 10,000 feet, like you're just asking the question in the abstract, are some works of art, objectively better than others? There's some real intuitive force to say, no, of course not. What are you talking about? What would that even mean? But then if you are thinking about specific examples, right, it starts to seem really implausible to say that, like, it's, I mean, look, there's no sense separate from like just doing a poll, which Michelangelo is better than Bob Ross, or Led Zeppelin is better than Nickelback or whatever. That they like that seems like that's like that is a really tough pill to swallow. So so there are whatever the right answer is, even with aesthetics, there are, I think, pretty strong intuitions on both sides.
Mm-hmm. I will speak in defense of Bob Ross, though.
Yeah, well, I guess Craig would ask, if there is no God, then then there are just trees. They're just little trees. There aren't happy little trees.
They might be happy. It's just their happiness doesn't matter because of the heat death of the universe.
The heat death of the universe will eliminate all the trees, happy or sad.
Yeah, exactly. So who cares if they were happy or not? Yeah.
All right, let's watch the last.
What I was trying to communicate there is that our moral lives really matter, that they make a difference. For me, the thought that everything perishes in the heat death of the universe, like Russell's credo, is so depressing.
Sorry, were you saying something?
I was just laughing that
Oh, yeah.
the heat death of the universe keeps coming up.
Yeah.
You summon it.
With Bob Ross, that the piece, yeah, right.
Oh, God, that's amazing.
Depressing, so awful that it just seems to put a question mark behind everything we do. All our accomplishments, all our deeds just seem so trivial in light of this cosmic doom that awaits us all.
But not for me.
Yeah.
It seems to me. It seems to me that
I just don't understand.
If I've saved somebody's life, I've done something significant. I've done something important. I've done something whose significance is not in any way threatened, diminished, reduced one iota by the fact that whatever it is, 40 billion years from now, the sun will explode. It's neither here nor there. I've saved a human life. That's what matters. And the fact it doesn't have cosmic significance doesn't seem to me to undermine its significance.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to talk about animals.
Animals.
Yes. What about our relationship with animals? Do we have a moral obligation to treat animals well, or are they just totally separate from us in the grand scheme of things?
Is that a question for me?
It's for both of you.
You want to go first?
Yeah. Well, I think that here, the Christian, the theist, has a tremendous advantage in terms of developing an environmental ethic and an ethic for the stewardship and care of animals. And it would be based not upon the fact that animals themselves are moral agents who have rights, because, as we've said, not being rational beings, they aren't moral agents. So it's not as though the antelope has the right to live or something of that sort. But rather, on a Christian view, God has given us stewardship of this beautiful planet to care for it and not to pollute it and ravage it and destroy it. And so I think we have responsibilities toward the animals that would involve not just slaughtering them aimlessly, polluting the seas and destroying their environments and so forth, but that we would be like gardeners, in a sense, tending a garden in which there are not only vegetable life, but also there would be animal life as well. So I would see this as rooted in the divine responsibilities and mandates given to us to be good stewards of the earth.
Are you a vegetarian?
No, I'm not.
No. So our stewardship towards animals only goes so far.
Right.
We can eat them. We can chop them up and wear them.
Yes. But that would be done in ways that would be, I think, compatible with certain kinds of rules.
No. So I'm not sure you get the advantage, as you put it, in that case. So,
but naturalism. What can the naturalist say in the struggle for survival of the fittest? How is there any kind of ethic toward behavior toward animals?
My view wasn't survival of the fittest. My view was that what morality boils down to is don't harm and do help. And now the question is, can creatures like chickens and cows be harmed? And the answer is, of course they can. Consequently, I think it's immoral to harm them. And that seems to me to provide a very strong moral reason to be a vegetarian, to not wear leather, and the like. So I certainly will concede that your view allows for a space for a certain kind of limited responsibility towards the animals. But I beg to differ with the claim that you've got a better handle on that situation than I do. It seems to me that our treatment of animals is morally appalling. It's morally completely unacceptable, and that we ought to radically revise the way we live precisely because they feel pain, they can be hurt, and we're constantly hurting these creatures.
Let's talk about the difference between various societies. how do we explain differences in culture, the treatment of women, the treatment of different races, genders, sexualities in various societies, if there is a single God with a single morality, or if there is a social contract standard.
Now here I don't think there would be any significant difference between us, in the sense that this is a question about moral epistemology, that is to say how we come to a knowledge of the good and the right, rather than a question of moral ontology, which is a question about the objective reality of the good and the right. And I think we would both agree that the objective existence of moral values and duties doesn't imply that these are always easy to grasp, or that people infallibly do grasp them, given our human proclivity to selfishness and
certain societies haven't caught up.
Yeah, I have absolutely no qualms about being politically incorrect and saying that certain societies like National Socialist Germany were morally corrupt. And or Afrikaner South Africa, or
what about Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, in its treatment of women, I think it's appalling. I think that once you have a transcendent moral standard that transcends culture and society, you're in a position to make the kind of judgments that the court did at Nuremberg in saying that these Nazi leaders were war criminals and were justly condemned for what they did. If you lack that transcendent standard, then I think you are faced with the problem of sociocultural relativism.
Well, as Craig says, this is, I think, actually a point in which we are in large agreement. I might not use the word transcendent here, but I think I agree otherwise with virtually everything he said. So if the question is, what's the explanation of the fact that so many societies have had morally appalling moral codes? The answer, in part, is it takes a while for civilization to work its way up to recognize moral truth, just as it takes a while for civilization to work its way up to recognize truths in any other domain. So I believe in evolution. I believe for familiar, I was making a remark like this over dinner, that for familiar evolutionary reasons, we were built to think the world moved along roughly Aristotelian lines with regard to physics. It's bad physics, but it's understandable why evolution would select us to think that something like Aristotelian physics was so. Happily, evolution also implanted in us reasoning capacity to step back from the beliefs that it gave us at the ground level and to challenge them and to test them. And so we've worked our way up from Aristotelian physics. And similarly, it takes centuries to work our way up to the point at which we recognize that all people are equal. It takes centuries until we work our way up to the point at which we recognize that women count as much as men, blacks count as much as whites, and that animals count too.
On that note, very nice. We'd like you to give some closing statements, just a few words.
Wow.
To the students.
Okay. Who's going to go first?
Who goes first?
Who went first?
I went first.
Why don't you go first?
Okay. I didn't prepare a closing statement, so this is just, I'm going to just wing it. I've argued tonight that if God exists, then you do have an objective basis for moral values, moral duties, and moral accountability. And I don't think that that's ever been disputed tonight. The debate has been more about whether naturalism can give you these things. But we haven't really contested that if God exists, then you will have a sound foundation for morality.
He's kind of right about that, and that is actually the one big flaw in Kagan's strategy, because
That's right. Yeah.
he should have been disputed that the entire time.
He should have from the beginning. Yeah. Maybe in his closing remark, he'll take a shot at that. But yeah.
Morality. God's own holy and just nature will be the good and will define the good as all things relate to it. His commandments to love him and to love our neighbor as ourselves will furnish grounds for our moral duties and obligations that will be objective and transcultural. And then our lives will have a paramount significance because the moral choices we make really do make a difference. They have eternal consequences. So I think theism is tremendously attractive and would invite you to consider it for yourselves. By contrast, on naturalism, it's hard to see why these creatures we call Homo sapiens have intrinsic moral value. This moral contract seems to me to be just a fiction and not really anything more than a social convention that Homo sapiens conspire among themselves to fancy themselves valuable. And this is especially evident, I think, on materialism and determinism, where, as I say, making a moral decision is no different than a tree growing a branch. It's hard to see how a puppet and its movements can have moral significance. In terms of moral duties, again, without someone to prohibit something or to command something, it's very hard to see how things can be prohibited or commanded. That's very different than the law of contradiction, I think, because the law of contradiction doesn't prescribe behavior. It doesn't say to you, don't contradict yourself. You're free to do that if you want to. It just says if you do so, you're irrational. But the moral duties are giving you prescriptions for behavior, for ways you ought to behave. And it seems to me on atheism that they are just like rules of etiquette. And then finally, moral accountability. I've already talked about that it's hard to see why we should always adopt the moral point of view rather than just act in our own self-interest on atheism, since it really doesn't make any difference in the long run. So I would just invite you as students to think deeply about whether or not theism isn't the better foundation for building your own moral life and career that lies ahead of you.
Well, let me start on a note of agreement. I would want to invite all of you to think as well. I don't think the issues that we've been talking about this evening are at all easy or simple. I suppose it's probably obvious that we haven't settled anything here, but it's important to also point out that we've only begun to address any number of relevant issues. This is not the kind of topic that you can do justice to in an hour and a half. At best, it can whet your appetite for learning more. So on the one hand, I want to encourage all of you who haven't taken a class in moral philosophy to take a class in moral philosophy and see how some of the great minds through history of Western civilization have dealt with some of these issues. And similarly, I would encourage all of you, theists or not, take classes in religion. I hope I've said nothing this evening to suggest any kind of hostility to religion. Far from it. I think it's a view worth taking very, very seriously. Though I happen to believe that theistic beliefs don't play any essential role in grounding morality. Now, I sketched a view according to which there is morality. It's an objective fact in as robust a sense as it seems to me one might like. That morality is real and genuine, and I tried to lay out at least the rough outline of how that view might go. It seems to me that one essential point of disagreement between Craig and me is something that I asked about several times. It's this move, what to my mind is the move from the thought that without theism, then our actions don't have eternal cosmic significance, to the conclusion that, therefore, without theism, our actions don't have significance, objective moral significance. That just seems to me to be a mistake. It seems to me that if I love somebody, the reality of that loving relationship is valuable, of real value, of genuine objective value, and it's not in any way threatened by the fact that I will die, my wife will die, my children will die, and eventually the universe will come to an end. The fact that billions and billions of years from now it's all going to be the same doesn't mean it's all the same now. I certainly want to concede that if you're looking for this kind of cosmic significance, atheism is not going to provide it for you. But that wasn't the subject of tonight's debate. The subject of tonight's debate was whether you needed that kind of cosmic significance to have morality. And on that issue, I'm quite confident the answer is no. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
That was very good. Very good.
Yeah, that was good. No, he zeroed in on probably his best point against Craig, and ended it with a nice little rhetorical flourish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, no, I think that was, again, given my major complaint about Kagan in this debate, that that he wasn't really going on the attack and challenging the idea that adding theism is going to help with these problems in any way. But putting that to one side, yeah, that was a very strong closing. He's very yeah, I mean, he was like, he did the way that he went back to his point about making that distinction between ultimate significance and objective moral significance was very good.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just thinking about the end. I mean, like, you could even like sharpen that by thinking like, what's the like, why is it that the time frame, like, if that's what ultimate means,
mm-hmm.
Like, if ultimate just means like significance to a being like God, right? Then okay, trivially,
Mm-hmm.
then that's something that you get with theism, not atheism. If ultimate significance means, like, I think a couple times Craig used the phrase "in the long run,"
Mm-hmm.
then why is the time scale important, right? Like
the time scale seems completely irrelevant. I think, like, Nagel makes that point in The Absurd, I think too, right? Like, if something's significant now, how significant it is in a trillion years is utterly irrelevant. And if something's insignificant now, adding a lot more time isn't going to improve its significance. And that's just utterly beside the point.
Of all four dimensions, why focus on time?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it'd be really nice if you only thought things would be significant if they were actually physically really large.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
like that. The physically larger you are, the more significant.
I mean, I would think that
I'm on board with that. The more your life matters morally, the bigger you are, the more space you take up.
Yeah. Well, I think all three of us should really consider that view.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. No, it's like, and really, like, I think if you think about finite time scales, it'd be very strange to think that longer finite time scales, like that's more significant somehow. Like, if you have if somebody, if you have like a child with a terminal illness,
Mm-hmm.
To say, well, what, okay, it might matter what you do to a child, who might live a normal lifespan, but, children with terminal illnesses, just use them how you want,
That's right. That's right.
Do what you want, like,
Yes. Unless they're very large children.
Right.
And so if differences between short and long times don't matter on finite scales, then again, I think that just sort of underlines how strange it is to think that only eternal time scales matter. That finite time scales don't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think, like, I mean, I know this is kind of unknowable, but, like, best guess, did Craig have a sense of how that went for him?
It seemed like right at the end. What did he say? He said something to Kagan.
He said that was good. That's what I heard.
It was very good.
Yeah, it was very good. I think he did. I mean, his demeanor was certainly very different than it was like when, say, he was debating Hitchens, when he was clearly cleaning Hitchens' clock. He had a very different demeanor. So I think he had at least some sense that this was not going that great for him.
Fair enough. Ugh.
I see Ben's drinking again.
Yeah. Very well. No, I'm not. I mean, these are they're quantum particles, like molecules. I'll give you molecules.
Yeah.
Like there might be molecules that are arranged in the shape of a whiskey, of a glass with some whiskey in it. But given atheism, they are just molecules.
Yeah. And anyway, it doesn't matter how much he drinks. The sun's going to explode.
My liver is not going to outlast the heat death of the universe.
Yeah.
So, and that's the only possible question that you could ask about whether behavior is healthy. Like whether it's ultimately cosmically significant given the heat death of the universe.
Yeah.
All right. Any last thoughts?
Satisfying.
Yeah, that was very satisfying. I do just want to bring up something else, kind of unrelated. I have a little bit of a beef with you, Ben. Earlier today, I watched your announcement of your Philosophy Friday thing, and when you were making the announcement for the first one, you said something to the effect that Mark and I are not your favorite philosophy professors. But
well, I think I said that you were among my favorite.
But you said we were not your favorites. You specifically said we were not your favorites. That Jennifer Burgess is your favorite philosophy professor.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Huh.
Yeah.
And your favorite Texan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
Right.
That must really. At least I'm not from Texas, so I don't have that. Am I your favorite Michigander? Do I at least get that?
Wait, don't you have parents?
Yeah.
Do I outweigh your parents, your brother, and all your
some cousins?
I at least
now I understand why Lucifer rebelled against God. It's exactly this kind of bullshit.
Yeah.
So wait, what's going on Fridays?
So Jed is going to be joining me for some live streams on Fridays. The Philosophy Fridays, no politics. So I believe we're doing one this coming Friday on Kantianism and utilitarianism.
Oh, nice.
So
you should just do your classes that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we have done joint for Zoom. We have done done videos on readings that we were both covering together, and back at in New Jersey, Rutgers. Since our schedules overlapped a lot, we're often oftentimes we'd do some joint in-person teaching sometimes. So. Which was it was always fun. Students seem to like it. But so before I go, I want to plug various things that are coming up. But first, because last time it was brought to my attention that I made a terrible person in the way that I did this by just talking about things coming up on this channel. Mark, what do you have going on?
I've got just started my semester at Damon. Teaching environmental ethics, critical thinking with Google, philosophy of religion class. So if you are a Damon student, it's still time to join the class. Please don't tell them about my participation in this chat. I don't like them, and I don't like for them to know my views. So other than that, snow's melting in Buffalo. That's good.
Okay, I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad everybody else got to hear it too. When you rattled off the classes that you teach at Demon College, one of the I'm pretty sure that's right. One of so one of them I actually should call attention to does sound is a class that I think you had the idea for in a conversation, like drinking on the porch in Florida many years ago. I think I remember the conversation, which was critical thinking in Google, which does sound like God's work. Doing a critical thinking class where you focus on these issues like the how to evaluate sources of information online and things like that. I mean, that should probably be something that's a high school graduation requirement.
Yeah.
It's the only time I really do social good in my my work.
Oh, fair enough. So.
Oh wait, Andrew World has our monkeys.
Oh
yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, here you go.
Oh, let's see the monkeys.
Yeah.
It's gorgeous.
No, he got us.
I look like Felix. Cool, I'll take it.
Yeah, it's
I
great.
love it. It's great. I was hoping that there would be pooping flung, but
No, this is good. This is us relaxing after a debate.
The poop flinging arms are tired.
Yeah.
you can see we're all three of us at peace.
Yeah. My God. Yeah. We hit Sam Harris with so much poop. We're
yeah. Good stuff.
All right, Ryan, what do you have going on?
I'm gonna be on this podcast again on Wednesday to talk about The Departed.
Yeah, I believe that's technically pronounced The Departed.
The Departed. Yeah. Otherwise, yeah, I don't know. Been playing virtual reality. It's been fun.
Yeah,
it's a good way to deal with the pandemic.
Yeah,
we should all hang out in VR. I mean, by the way, we all have VR headsets now.
Yeah. Man, I don't like you telling everybody that, but yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I'm outing you guys.
Yeah, no, we for sure. So, all right. Well, having established what Mark is doing, having gotten an incomplete version of what Ryan is doing, he's also going to be part of a patron bonus episode. Trying to do more philosophy stuff there too. A beginner's guide to Immanuel Kant with Russ Riglia and Matt McManus and Ryan. So it's probably going to drop for patrons Thursday after next. This coming Thursday is going to be a friendly debate about MMT, modern monetary theory, with Nia Kola and C. Derek Varn. Which is something I know a lot of people who watch this are curious about, and obviously it's one of those things that just kind of scratches the surface, but I hope gives people some sense of what some of the the debates are there, or what some of the issues are in dispute, between the sort of more old style Marxism that C. Derek Varn represents and the MMT view that Nicola has, which is a slightly more sophisticated MMT view. It's not just like this is the one neat trick that solves everything. So meanwhile, on Wednesday, as Ryan mentioned, we're going to be talking about The Departed with Ryan, with of course our producer Forrest, with Jacobin, deputy editor Micah Utrecht, and of course friend Daniel Bestner. So that's coming up on Wednesday. On Tuesday, actually, this is a 2-movie thing week because on Saturday with patrons, I watched the new Fred Hampton movie, Judas and the Black Messiah, with Jason Miles, Forrest, J. Andrew World. And then afterwards, we're just watching with patrons, but we recorded our reaction thing. We'll put that out on Tuesday, and then there are 2 things coming up on Monday. So one of them, of course, is the regular GTA episode. So this is going to be with Emma Vigland from the Majority Report. Almost said the Minority Report, like the movie. The Majority Report. Going to talk about some of what's going on with Biden. Going to look back on the life and greatness of Rush Limbaugh. And Pascal Robert is going to be on during the second half. So that should all be really good. And then earlier than that on Monday, so episode, of course, is 7:30 Eastern. Earlier than that at 5, as was teased at the beginning, I am going to be arguing with megachurch pastor and author Doug Wilson on the exact subject of tonight's debate. So that's at 5 o'clock on the modern debate YouTube channel. It should be good. Should be going to try to do 5 to 10% more poo throwing than Kagan did in this debate. So people who are interested in this, do please check that out. And so unless there's anything else, we need to get an update on Mark's kids, anything like that. Then I think we can. They're okay.
Kids still alive.
Yeah, I think they're okay.
Yeah, that's definitely one thought too many. All right.
All right. I just upgraded my wallpaper.
I mean, okay, according to what? To whom? What's the standard?
Yeah. Look what's on my wall.
Oh, very nice. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Given okay, if we assume that God exists, are your kids okay?
Oh yeah, they're fine.
Okay. Very good.
Otherwise, we're just talking about particles arranged skin-wise, so who cares?
Yeah, that's fair. All right, guys.
And wait, Andrew asked a good question. Can Mark and I do a debate breakdown of your debate?
If you guys want to do that, I will send you the login information for the GTA StreamYard, and so you can just do that. Just pick a night where we're not doing anything here on the channel.
That'd be really funny.
I'll watch it, but I'll just be in the chat. So nice. All right.
That happens, Ryan.
Thanks everybody as always for watching along. Really appreciate everybody did that, ask questions in chat, all of that stuff. Thank you to Ryan, despite the many areas of ignorance that he exhibited tonight. Thank you to Mark. Really appreciate you guys. Thanks everybody for watching. Left is best.